Hello everyone, welcome back to another scary story. Your place where we uncover the darkest mysteries in a calming and reflective way. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes. Relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. Now get comfortable and relax. It's strange how quickly you can become accustomed to the silence of a new place. When we first moved to 23 Hemlock Drive, I remember how the stillness crept under my skin. The house wasn't much, just a small two-story home at the end of a narrow street. But the forest beyond it, the whispering pines, always seemed to have something to say. The wind would rattle the trees in the distance, and the shadows cast by the branches always seemed to shift unnaturally. But those were just the first things I noticed, the things you dismiss when you're too busy settling in. We hadn't been here long when Liam started acting strange. At first, it was just little things. His night terrors, his wide eyes as he pointed into corners calling out about the black people. At first, I laughed it off too. He was just a kid, right? Kids have vivid imaginations. But the more he insisted, shaking, with fear, sobbing that they were watching, the more unsettling it became. The house had its oddities. For one, the closet in Liam's room refused to stay closed. No matter how many times I shut it, the door would creak open again. It wasn't a big deal at first. Maybe the hinges were just old or the air was too damp. But after Liam's screams started, I began to wonder if it wasn't the house, but something else that kept pulling it open, something I couldn't see. It was Emily who first noticed the tall figure outside Liam's door. She was up late one night, tidying up, and caught a glimpse of something too tall, too thin, just standing at the edge of the hallway. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but she swore she saw it just behind Liam's door, watching. She convinced herself it was nothing, probably a trick of the light, but she couldn't shake the feeling. Neither could I. Still, we didn't think much of it at the time. After all, it's easy to dismiss the idea that something might be wrong when you've never had proof that there's anything more to this world than what we see. But that changed one night when the air in Liam's room felt heavy, and it wasn't just the atmosphere. It was the way the air clung to us, like the weight of something ancient, waiting, watching. The first time I heard the whispers, I was standing in the doorway, holding Liam as he slept. Emily had just gone to bed, and I thought I heard something faint and unintelligible. At first, I told myself it was just the wind through the trees outside. But when I stepped closer, I knew better. It wasn't the wind. It was them. The ones who watched from the dark corners of the room. I didn't know it then, but it was only the beginning. We were just beginning to learn what it meant to live on Hemlock Drive. But Liam, he knew all along. He wasn't just hearing things. They were waiting for him, and it was only a matter of time before they'd take him. The second night after Emily saw the tall figure at Liam's door, things started to feel off in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the feeling of being watched. It was the sensation that something was moving in the dark, shifting, just out of sight. The kind of unease that gnaws at the back of your neck and makes you double-check the locks, even though you know you've locked them a dozen times already. Liam's nightmares worsened. He would wake up screaming, always at the same time, exactly 3:17 a.m. It was like clockwork, and no matter how many times we comforted him, the terror wouldn't go away. He'd sit up in bed, eyes wide, pointing at the corner of the room. His voice would crack as he whispered, "They're here, they're looking at me." His little hand would shake as it reached toward the empty corner. Emily and I would try everything, changing the nightlight, sitting with him, holding his hand. But nothing worked. After a while, we'd just sit in silence, hoping that the terror would pass, but it never did. I started to feel it too, that gnawing feeling like I was being watched, like I wasn't alone in the room, even when I was the only one there. The worst part? It wasn't just Liam anymore. It was me. One night I stayed up late to finish some work, my mind tired from the constant stress of adjusting to the new place. I was in the living room, the only light coming from the soft glow of a lamp beside me. The house was eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustle of the wind outside and the sound of Emily snoring faintly in the room upstairs. But then, I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible, like static on a broken radio. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I froze, trying to pinpoint the source, but the sound didn't come again. I shook it off, telling myself I was tired and overworked. It was probably just the wind through the trees, the same wind that always made the branches creak and groan outside. I tried to go back to my work, but that feeling, that presence, lingered, in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was in the room with me. The next night, it happened again. This time I wasn't alone. Liam was crying, a soft guttural sobbing that tore through the silence of the house. I rushed to his room, expecting the usual scene, him trembling in bed, eyes wide with fear. But this time, when I opened the door, he wasn't in his bed. Liam was standing in the middle of the room, staring into the darkness of the closet. His eyes were glassy, unblinking. He wasn't crying anymore, but there was something off about him. His small body was rigid, his posture unnaturally stiff. "Liam?" I called, my voice trembling as I stepped into the room. His head snapped around, and for a moment, he looked at me with eyes that weren't his. Dark, distant, like he wasn't really seeing me at all. "They're here," he said in a voice that wasn't his either, low and raspy, like something crawling out of the dark. "They're watching." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. As I reached out to touch his shoulder, the room grew colder. I could see my breath now, sharp and white in the dim light. And that's when I heard it. The whispering. Louder this time. Faint but unmistakable. The closet door, despite my best efforts to keep it shut, was cracked open. It was like something was waiting on the other side. I hesitated, my mind telling me that I was just imagining things. But when I looked back at Liam, his eyes were fixed on the door, like he could see something that I couldn't. My body moved before I could think. I grabbed Liam and pulled him away from the closet, holding him close as I backed out of the room. I didn't even look behind me. I didn't want to see whatever was in the dark. Emily came rushing in, hearing Liam's cries. She scooped him up, murmuring reassurances, but I could barely hear her. My mind was reeling. What had just happened? My son, frozen like that. His voice, that wasn't his. The whispering in the room. It wasn't just his imagination. I could see that now. Something was here, and it was getting worse. That night I stayed awake, sitting in Liam's room, watching the closet. The whispers came again, soft and almost imperceptible at first, like a faint hum beneath the silence of the house. But they were there. And then just before dawn I saw it, a shadow slipping past the crack in the closet door. I jumped to my feet, heart hammering, but when I opened the door there was nothing, only the emptiness. And yet, I felt it. Something was there, watching, waiting. It was real. They were real, and whatever had been stalking Liam had found its way into our home. It was the third week after the whispers first started that things began to spiral out of control. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was shifting somehow. The walls seemed to close in at night, the floors creaked with heavy footsteps when no one was around, and every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something moving just outside the corner of my eye. Emily had noticed it too, but what unsettled me the most wasn't the strange noises or the cold drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. It was the eyes. I started seeing them at night, tiny pinpricks of light that glowed in the shadows, watching, from the corners of the rooms. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, a reflection off a piece of glass or a shadow cast by the trees outside. But it wasn't. I could feel them. Eyes that were too aware, too alive, following. My every movement. It started small. The first time I thought I was imagining it. But over the next few nights I saw the glowing eyes more and more, flickering in the dark like dying embers. And they were always in Liam's room. Sometimes they'd be in the corner by his closet, sometimes at the foot of his bed. Other times I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see them staring at me through the crack in his bedroom door. Emily tried to reassure me that it was nothing, that I was just tired, that the stress was getting to me, and maybe I was. But every time I saw those eyes, I felt my blood run cold. It was as if they were drawing me in, compelling me to look closer, to step into the darkness where they lived. One night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know what was happening, what was behind that door. After Liam had finally fallen asleep, his soft breaths filling the silence of the room, I stood by his bed, staring at the closet. The air was thick with something. I couldn't tell if it was the humidity, or if it was just the suffocating weight of dread. But it was there. I could feel it in my chest like a pressure pulling me toward the closet. I couldn't explain why I did it, but I reached out and grabbed the door handle. It was cold, slick under my fingers, and for a moment I just stood there. Then I yanked it open. The air that hit me was cold, unnaturally cold, like stepping into a freezer after being outside in the sun. It smelled stale, like something had been locked away for years. And there, at the back of the closet, I saw it. 2 glowing eyes staring back at me, just floating there in the dark. I froze, heart racing in my chest. It was like a nightmare, only I was awake. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched. And then just like that, they vanished. I slammed the closet door shut, stumbling back, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind screaming that I had to wake Liam up, that we had to leave. But my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off the closet door, terrified that if I looked away, whatever it was would come out. Finally, I managed to tear myself away from the door, stumbling toward the hallway. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, I heard it, the soft rustling of something moving behind me. I spun around, my pulse pounding in my ears. Nothing, but it was the feeling that got to me. The feeling that whatever had been in that closet was still there, watching me from the shadows of the hallway. I tried to convince myself that I was losing it, that I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew that whatever was here, it was real. That night I stayed up, keeping a vigilant watch over Liam's room. The whispers didn't come, but the feeling of being watched never left. The eyes, they were always there, just out of sight, lurking in the dark corners of the house. It was like they were waiting for the right moment, and then I heard it, a soft guttural whisper, so faint I almost didn't hear it at all. "He's ours now." The words didn't come from anywhere I could see. They seemed to come from the walls, themselves, or the very air around me. I spun around, but the room was empty. Liam was still asleep, his little chest rising and falling in the rhythm of deep, untroubled sleep. But I knew, with sickening certainty, that it wasn't over. What had been watching us was closer now, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. I didn't know how much longer I could protect him. I didn't know how much longer any of us could stay in this house, but something told me that wherever we went, the shadows would follow. They were already inside. The night after the whispering stopped, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Something in me, some primal instinct, was screaming at me to stay awake, to keep watch over Liam, to never let him out of my sight. Emily didn't understand. She still thought I was just being paranoid, but I could see it in her eyes. She'd been hearing the whispers too, feeling the cold spots in the air, and she couldn't pretend it wasn't real anymore. But she still held on to that shred of hope that maybe it would stop, that maybe if we just ignored it, it would go away. But the thing was, the longer we stayed, the more I realized that it wasn't just about Liam. It was about all of us, these dark shapes, these presences. They didn't care about the walls we built, the doors we locked, the distance we tried to put between us and the place that should have been a refuge. They weren't bound by the rules of the house. The house wasn't the problem. It was the land. We hadn't heard the whole story before we moved in. The real story. The one the town didn't like to talk about. The one about the land beneath Hemlock Drive, the whispering pines, and the ancient burial ground that had been disturbed. I had no idea how much history those trees carried, but the more I looked into it, the more I realized that the land itself wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. The old ones, the ones who had lived there long before the settlers had arrived, they were still present and they watched and they were waiting. I wish I had found out sooner. I wish I'd known that we were never meant to be here. But it didn't matter now. The land had already claimed us. The truth started to settle in as I watched Liam that night. He had started to talk to them, the shadows, not just pointing at the corners, not just muttering in his sleep anymore. He was speaking directly to them, his voice low and hollow. "They said they want me," he said one night, his voice strange, distant. I wasn't sure if he was awake or asleep. His eyes were open, but they were empty, like he wasn't seeing anything at all. "They said they'll come for me soon." I shook him awake, panic seizing me. "Who said that, Liam? Who?" He blinked rapidly, like he was trying to wake up, and then he looked at me, his eyes wide, with fear. "I don't know, they won't tell me." His voice wavered, trembling. "But they're always watching." I tried to comfort him, holding him close, but the terror in his eyes was real. It was raw. And it wasn't just the terror of a child afraid of the dark. It was the terror of someone who knew something had come for him, something much older and much darker than anything I could protect him from. I felt the weight of the dark pressing down on the house. I felt it suffocating me, pressing into my chest, filling the air with something thick and oppressive. I don't know how to explain it, but it was as though the walls were closing in, like the house itself was alive, a living thing, hungry and waiting. The air felt wrong, like it had been laced with something poisonous. I could feel the heaviness in my lungs, the difficulty in breathing, the dryness in my throat. And outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the trees, creating an almost deafening noise that seemed to come from nowhere. It sounded like the whispers were in the trees themselves. I needed to do something. I needed to get Liam out of there. But I couldn't even think straight anymore. The weight of the house, of the land, was suffocating me, dragging me down into the same fear that had gripped my son. I tried everything. I looked up old rituals, old methods to try to cleanse the house, to banish whatever dark force had taken hold of it. I burned sage. I hung salt around the doorways. I even tried to contact a local spiritual advisor, but they refused to come near the property. They said the land was cursed, that nothing would help. Emily tried to be practical, still trying to act like this was something we could fix, that maybe we could move away. But I knew better. Moving wouldn't help. The shadows followed us now. They had claimed us, body and soul. One night, after an especially bad episode, I decided I had to confront it. I didn't know how, but I couldn't let this thing take Liam. I couldn't let it take any of us. I went back to Liam's room, determined to face whatever was waiting there. The air was thick again, suffocating, and the whispers were louder now, almost intelligible. I felt the coldness from the closet first, the air around me so frigid that my breath turned to mist in front of me. Then I saw it, the dark shapes, tall and thin, standing just beyond the door, watching. Their glowing eyes were like coal, smoldering in the darkness. I didn't move. I couldn't. I wanted to scream, to run, but the shadows were already inside me. They were waiting for me to move. And then the voice came again, this time louder than before, almost deafening. "He's ours. He's been chosen." And in that moment, I knew that it wasn't just Liam they wanted. It was all of us. They'd been watching us, waiting for the right moment to take us into the dark. I backed out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest, trying not to look at the eyes, not to give them the satisfaction of knowing I was afraid. But it didn't matter. They already knew. The weight of the dark wasn't just pressing in from the corners of the room. It was inside me now, and it was only a matter of time before it took us all. By the time the sun began to rise that morning, I felt the walls closing in tighter than ever. It was as though the house, this forsaken place at the edge of the Whispering Pines forest, had become a prison, and we were its captives. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd truly slept. The shadows, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, had worn me down to the bone. Liam, once the bright-eyed child full of laughter, had become a shell of the boy I remembered. His once innocent eyes had grown hollow, his skin pale and his limbs thin. It wasn't just the nightmares anymore. He had begun to speak in his sleep, whispers in a language I couldn't understand, words that seemed to crawl under my skin. He refused to leave his room, and when he did, he clung to me like a lifeline, his grip so tight I could feel his little fingers trembling. I had to face it. I had to face what I had been denying all along. The house, the land. It wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just some restless spirit trying to get attention. This was something much older, much darker. The legends of the Native American burial ground, the stories about the Dark Watchers had been real. Those ancient, hungry things had never stopped watching, and now they had us in their grip. Emily finally realized it too. She saw the way Liam had changed, the way we all had, the exhaustion in my eyes, the way the house itself seemed to pulse with some dark energy. It wasn't just the kid's imagination, it was real, and it was getting worse. I tried one last time to reach out for help. I contacted a local priest, someone with experience in real hauntings, but he refused to come. When I asked why, he told me the land was cursed. No one had dared to step foot on Hemlock Drive for decades. There were just some places where you didn't fight what lived there. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. You don't fight it, you leave. But it was too late. I realized that even if we left, the darkness would follow. It would follow Liam, follow us. I knew it in the pit of my stomach. It was already inside, a parasite feeding off our fear, our suffering. That night, as I sat in the living room with Emily, trying to ignore the oppressive quiet around us, I heard something. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a voice. It was a sound, a scraping, as if something was dragging itself across the floor. I glanced at Emily. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the same terror reflected in her face. She knew. I followed the sound to Liam's room. The darkness inside thicker than I'd ever felt it before. The air was suffocating, each breath harder to take. When I opened the door, my heart stopped. Liam wasn't in his bed. He wasn't anywhere in the room. I searched frantically, but it was Emily's scream that made me turn. She was standing in the doorway, her face pale as she pointed to the closet. The door was open just a crack, a sliver of darkness inside. But it wasn't the darkness that froze me in place. It was what I saw through the gap. 2 glowing eyes. The same eyes I had seen before in the corners of the house, in the dark corners of Liam's room. But this time, they weren't floating in the shadows. They were inside the closet, waiting, staring back at me. And then, I heard it. That same whisper, low and guttural, crawling into my mind. "He's ours." Liam's voice answered from somewhere inside, but it wasn't his voice. It was distorted, hollow, like it had been twisted into something else. "I don't want to go," he sobbed, and my heart broke. "I don't want to leave." I rushed forward, yanking the closet door open, and there he was, Liam, standing in the center of the closet, his body rigid, his eyes wide with terror. But there was something wrong with him. Something had taken hold of him. He was staring straight ahead, not at me, but at something in the darkness that I couldn't see. The shadows seemed to come alive, crawling from every corner, every crack in the room. They stretched toward Liam, thin, emaciated figures with eyes that burned like coal. I reached for him, but before I could get close, one of the shadows shot out from the closet and slammed into me, throwing me back against the wall with bone-crushing force. Emily screamed as I fell to the floor, my vision spinning. I tried to stand, but the weight of it all, The pressure of the darkness, the cold, the suffocating air made it impossible. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Through the haze, I saw Emily rushing toward Liam, her voice frantic, desperate. She called his name, but the shadows pulled him closer, dragging him toward the closet, toward whatever was waiting there. "No! Liam!" Emily cried, her hands outstretched, but it was too late. The darkness swallowed him whole. In that moment, I understood. The land had claimed him. The Watchers had taken him just as they had taken others before. The house, the land. It wasn't just a place, it was a trap, a snare for the lonely, the vulnerable, and the fearful. It was always watching, always waiting. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with terror. When I finally managed to get up, I found Emily standing in the middle of the room, her hands shaking, her face pale. Liam was gone. And the shadows were still there, waiting for the next one. I remember the first time I heard about Black Hollow Quarry. It was back when I was just a kid, running around Ravensbrook with my brother Ethan. The older kids used to talk about it in hushed tones, daring each other to venture into the place. They said it was cursed, haunted by the souls of miners who died in a collapse back in 1983. 17 men buried alive under tons of rock, their bodies never recovered. The whole town knew the story, but we thought it was just a piece of local folklore. Something to scare kids and make our town seem more mysterious than it really was. But then the dare came. It was a Saturday night in October, one of those crisp evenings where the air smells like fallen leaves and the moon is barely a sliver in the sky. I was sitting at the table in my living room, scrolling through my phone, when I got a text from Ryan Carter. Ryan Carter. "You in for tonight? We're heading to Black Hollow." Ryan was my best friend, the guy who'd always talk me into doing things I wasn't sure about. This time he wasn't alone. He'd already roped in my girlfriend Jenna and his sister Mia, who was always up for something wild. I didn't even hesitate. Me. "Hell yeah, let's do it." Ryan's reply came almost immediately. "Ryan Carter. Meet at my place at 10:30. Bring flashlights and don't be a pussy." I knew what he was trying to do. He was always pushing the limits, testing the waters for the rest of us to follow. And Jenna? Well, she wasn't the kind of girl who backed down from a challenge. She was brave, almost recklessly so. Mia, too, was the same, always laughing in the face of fear, never afraid of what the night might bring. When I told Ethan about it, he just shook his head. "You're nuts," he said. But there was something in his eyes, something like concern, or maybe fear. He'd never liked me going to that part of town even when we were kids. He'd heard the stories too. We all had. "You don't want to mess with that place," he warned, voice low. I rolled my eyes. "Come on, it's just a mine. It's been abandoned for years. Nothing's gonna happen." Ethan didn't respond. He just stared at me for a long moment, as if weighing something heavy in his mind. But in the end, he just sighed and turned away, muttering something about making sure I didn't get lost out there. The truth is, I wasn't worried. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or whatever else people thought haunted that place. I just wanted to go out there, prove I was brave, and have some fun with my friends. What could possibly go wrong? We all met up at Ryan's place just before 10:30. The night was already cool and the town felt empty. The streets were quiet, the occasional car passing by in the distance. Ryan's house was on the outskirts of town, and the road to the quarry ran through a patch of forest that looked even darker in the fall. The dead trees seemed to watch us as we piled into Ryan's old Jeep. "Ready to face your fears?" Ryan asked, grinning as he drove. "Always," I said, trying to match his energy. I looked over at Jenna, who smiled and squeezed my hand. I could tell she was excited too. Mia sat in the back, her fingers drumming on the seat. "This is gonna be insane," she said, her voice full of that reckless enthusiasm. As we drove further into the woods, the air grew thicker, heavier. The road, old and cracked, seemed to narrow as we neared the quarry. The trees, their twisted branches clawing at the sky, blocked out most of the moonlight, making the path ahead feel even darker than it should have been. "I heard the place is haunted," Mia said, her voice suddenly quieter, though I could still hear the thrill in her words. "Like really haunted. People have disappeared there before." Yeah, we've all heard the stories," Ryan said, his voice full of bravado. "Nothing's gonna happen, it's just an old mine." I didn't say much, but I felt the weight of those words settling in my gut. There was something about this place, something I couldn't explain, that felt wrong. But I pushed it aside. Tonight was about being brave, not about worrying. We parked the Jeep at the edge of the old miner's road, the narrow dirt path that led to the quarry entrance. The air was colder here, a chill that cut through my jacket like ice. We grabbed our flashlights and set off down the trail, the crunch of dead leaves under our boots the only sound for a while. The deeper we went, the more I could feel something changing. The atmosphere felt thicker, like the air was heavier, and I began to feel like we were being watched. But I chalked it up to the nerves, the stories, the way the quarry had been built up in my mind as something to fear. The others seemed unfazed. We finally made it to the entrance of Black Hollow Quarry. The old mining equipment, rusted and forgotten, loomed in the darkness. The pit itself stretched out before us, a vast, jagged void in the earth. The quarry was like a tomb, silent and still, as if holding secrets that no one was meant to uncover. "We're here," Ryan said, turning to grin at us. "Now, who's first?" I stepped forward, heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The quarry stretched before us like a black abyss. It seemed to pulse with something dark, as though the very ground beneath our feet was alive, waiting. The rusted machinery, abandoned and decaying, stood like silent sentinels guarding the secrets of the place. The wind whispered through the trees, and the chill in the air felt colder than it had any right to be. I didn't want to admit it, but as soon as we stepped onto that old, crumbling road, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something wasn't right, but I brushed it off. I couldn't let anyone see that I was scared. We were here to prove we were tougher than all the stories, tougher than the legends that had been passed down through the years. Ryan led the way, as usual, his footsteps confident, too confident. He was trying to make light of the situation, cracking jokes about how spooky the place was, but I could hear the edge in his voice, the slight tremor he was trying to hide. Jenna walked beside me, her hand brushing against mine occasionally. I could tell she was nervous too, but she kept her cool. Mia, on the other hand, was acting like she was on a hike through a normal park. She even pointed out the rusted equipment and tried to make a game out of it, asking if we could find the creepy old shack that was supposedly the home of the Hollow Man. I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone in Ravensbrück knew them. They said that after the mine collapse in 1983, something changed at Black Hollow. The miners didn't die peacefully. The way they were trapped, buried alive, crushed under the weight of the earth, it twisted their spirits. They became angry, vengeful, restless, and the most feared of them all, the one who had been there since the beginning, was the Hollow Man. They said he could appear as a shadow, something that moved in the dark, always just out of reach. He would watch you, follow you, never letting you escape. Some said he was the spirit of the mine itself, an entity that had grown hungry and malevolent over the years. Others said he was just the ghost of one of the miners, trapped in the quarry, for eternity, waiting for someone to take his place. But again, I didn't believe in any of it. I couldn't. It was just a story, a myth designed to keep kids like us away from a dangerous, abandoned place. At least that's what I told myself. We continued deeper into the quarry, the flashlights cutting through the blackness like blades of light. The further we went, the quieter everything became. There was no sound of wildlife, no breeze stirring the leaves, just the sound of our feet crunching against the dirt and stone, and our voices, which now seemed too loud, too intrusive in the oppressive silence. After a while, we reached a clearing. It was a plateau, high above the quarry, surrounded by jagged rock formations. From here, we could look out over the entire pit, the sheer drop on all sides. There was a certain beauty to the place, a haunting kind of beauty, but there was also an unsettling feeling, a presence in the air that I couldn't shake. I was about to say something, to ask if we could head back, when Jenna suddenly stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. "Do you see that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. We all froze, our flashlights dancing over the dark rocks. I squinted, trying to make sense of what she was pointing at. At first it just looked like a shadow, one of the long, jagged shapes cast by the cliffs and trees. But then it moved. It wasn't just a shadow. It was too dark, too unnatural. Like, it was more than just the absence of light. The way it moved, how it darted from one spot to another, too quickly, too smoothly. It didn't make sense. Shadows don't move like that. "Guys," Ryan said, his voice tight. He was no longer joking. His flashlight swung around erratically, trying to catch whatever it was. What the hell? But the shadow didn't stop. It moved again, faster now, crossing the clearing in what felt like the blink of an eye. It circled around us. Always. Just on the edge of our lights, just out of reach. "Is that a person?" Mia asked, her voice shaking. I wasn't sure what it was. It wasn't a person, I knew that. People don't move like that, not so quickly, not so fluidly, like they're part of the night itself. And then, as if it was listening to us, though, shadow darted straight toward me. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. It was close now, too close. And then it stopped, just inches from me, right on the edge of the light, where I could feel its presence but not see it. It was there, and yet it wasn't. It was as if it was waiting, watching. I turned to Jenna, who was standing beside me, her face pale, eyes wide. She was just as frozen as I was. "Let's go," I said, my voice hoarse. "Let's get out of here." I didn't need to say it twice. Ryan was already backing up, his flashlight shaking in his hands. Mia, too, was moving, her steps quick, almost frantic. But as we turned to leave, the shadow moved again. It darted across the ground, too fast to track, and then just as quickly, it was gone. It was like it had never been there. We all stopped, at once, breathing hard, trying to convince ourselves it was just our imaginations, that we'd seen something in the dark. But none of us said it. None of us believed it. I couldn't shake the feeling, though, that something was watching us. Something that had been watching us from the moment we set foot on that cursed path. Something that wasn't going to let us leave so easily. "We need to go," Jenna said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my throat dry. We didn't speak much after that, all of us too shaken to joke or laugh. We walked quickly, almost running, back toward the road, back toward the Jeep. But as we neared the exit, I couldn't help but feel it again. That presence. It wasn't gone. It was closer now. And just before we stepped back onto the road, I could hear it. The faintest whisper, as if the night itself had spoken. Always. I froze, my heart stopping in my chest. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a trick of the mind. It was real. It was something waiting for us. Something that wouldn't let go. I didn't sleep that night. Not at all. I tried. I really did. After we made it back to Ryan's Jeep and drove out of the quarry, I thought I'd feel relief. But the closer we got to town, the more that gnawing, suffocating feeling stuck with me. That presence, that thing, hadn't just disappeared. I could feel it lingering, like it was following us, creeping behind us. Every time I turned a corner, I thought I saw something in the rearview mirror, just a flicker of dark movement, too quick for my eyes to catch. When we finally made it back to Ryan's house, we sat in the driveway for what felt like forever, none of us saying a word. We didn't need to. We all knew what we'd seen, what we'd felt. The shadow wasn't a trick. It was real. And it wasn't just out there. It was with us now. Jenna was the first to speak. She'd been so quiet the whole drive back, her hands tight around her seatbelt, her eyes fixed on the dashboard. I could see her looking out of the corner of her eye, checking the rearview mirror as if expecting something to be there too. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. Ryan, who'd been trying to shake it off, now sat up straight, his face pale under the dim porch light. Yeah, that was, I don't know, not normal. Mia, who'd been sitting in the back with her arms crossed, suddenly spoke up. We all saw it, right? I wasn't just... No, I interrupted, my voice hoarse. We all saw it. That thing wasn't... It wasn't just a shadow. Everyone fell silent again. For a moment I felt like I was the only one still thinking clearly. I was the one who had been terrified, the one who hadn't been able to explain it away as a trick of the light or some stupid coincidence. Do you think it was following us? Jenna asked quietly. Her question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know how to answer. But the truth was, in the way my heart was still pounding, in the way my chest felt like it was being crushed by something invisible, something real. I don't know, I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. But I don't think it's done with us. I think it followed us back. It wasn't just out there. It's in here, too. The air in the Jeep felt thick, like the weight of the quarry had followed us, attaching itself to the car, to the space between us. It felt wrong, like we were being suffocated by something unseen. Ryan started the engine and drove down the road, but no one spoke. We didn't want to say it out loud, but I think we all knew it was the same thing we were all thinking. Whatever it was that haunted Black Hollow, it had come with us. And it wasn't just going to let us walk away. By the time I got home, it was nearly 2 in the morning. The streetlights outside my window flickered as I pulled my jacket tight around me, walking into my house with a quiet dread crawling up my spine. I didn't want to be alone, not tonight, not with that following me. Ethan wasn't home yet, which was a relief. He wouldn't understand any of this. I could barely understand it myself. I locked the door behind me, checked the windows to make sure they were all shut tight, and sat down on the couch. I tried to calm myself, to breathe. I had to keep my head together. It wasn't real. It was just fear. The stories, the history of Black Hollow. I kept telling myself that, but deep down, I knew it was pointless. Around 3:00 a.m., I finally drifted into a half-sleep. But it wasn't restful, not even close. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow again, darting in and out of the darkness, moving unnaturally fast, always watching me. And each time I would jerk awake, heart pounding, sweat slick on my skin. I didn't know if I was asleep or awake anymore, if the visions I saw in the darkness were real, or just my mind playing tricks. But then, just as I started to drift off again, I heard it. A sound. A whisper. So quiet at first, I thought it was just a part of the dream I hadn't fully shaken off. But then it came again, more distinct this time, so low that I felt it in my bones, a vibration that rattled my skull. It's inside the house. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The words had come from nowhere, like they were coming from the shadows themselves, deep in the corners of my room. The same voice that had whispered that word in the quarry. I snapped my head toward the corner of the room, my eyes wide with panic. But I saw nothing. Just the faint outline of the dresser, the slant of the window letting in the pale glow of moonlight. But I could feel it. Something was there. Something in that corner of the room. Something I couldn't see. But I could feel it, deep in my chest, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. I didn't move. I couldn't. It felt like every muscle in my body had frozen in place, as if some invisible force had gripped me. And then, in that silence, the whisper came again. Always. The word echoed in my mind over and over again, bouncing off the walls like it was coming from everywhere. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as the realization hit me. It wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't just a trick of the light, or a figment of my imagination. The thing in the quarry had followed us, and now it was inside my house. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat felt like it was being choked, and my lungs were too tight, too heavy. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stare at the corner where I knew something was waiting. And then, as if to prove my worst fear, the air in the room grew colder, colder than it had any right to be. The window, which I'd locked just hours before, clicked open. A gust of wind rushed through, carrying with it the faintest sound, something like a breath, deep and labored. And in that moment, I knew. The hollow man had come home, and he wasn't going to let me go. Don't know how much time passed after that. It could have been seconds or hours. All I know is that I couldn't move. My body felt as if it were frozen in place, trapped in that moment when the whisper had filled the room. I didn't dare look away from the corner of the room. The window was open now, just a crack, but the cold air kept pushing in, thick and biting like it was alive. I could feel it, the presence, the thing I couldn't see but knew was there. It was in the room with me. I could feel it. I finally forced my eyes away from the corner and looked at the door. It was shut. It had been shut when I came in. I was sure of it. I had locked it behind me when I came home, double-checked the windows. But now, the door handle was moving slowly, as if something or someone was on the other side trying to get in. A soft metallic click echoed through the room. I could barely breathe. My heart felt like it was going to explode from the pressure in my chest. Was it really happening? Was I losing my mind? Or was this something else? The whisper came again, right behind me. Too soft to be real, but too clear to ignore. Always. And then, something shifted in the room. The air thickened, the shadows lengthened. I knew something was behind me, something big, dark, and wrong. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I don't know how long. I stayed like that, staring at the door, knowing that I wasn't alone anymore. Finally, I managed to stand up. My legs were shaky, like they hadn't borne weight in days. But I had to move. I had to get out of there, away from whatever was waiting for me. I didn't even stop to grab my jacket or my phone. I just ran. I tore down the stairs and out the door, not even caring if I was dressed or not. My breath came in ragged gasps, the cold night air hitting my lungs like ice. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to get away from my house, from that thing that was inside. It wasn't just a shadow anymore, it was real. As I ran, I thought of Ryan, of Jenna, of Mia. I needed them. I needed someone who might understand what was happening. Maybe they'd seen it too. Maybe I wasn't crazy. I barely noticed how far I had run until I found myself on the outskirts of town, standing at the edge of the woods, the dark shapes of the trees stretching overhead like twisted fingers. Black Hollow Quarry wasn't far. I should have turned back. But I didn't. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe I thought if I went back to where it all started I could find answers, or maybe just some sense of control. But the truth was, I was terrified. Terrified of what I had seen and felt. Terrified of the thing that was following me. I pulled out my phone and called Ryan, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried Jenna. No answer. Mia. Nothing. I left messages, asking them to call me back. But inside, I knew. I knew that whatever had happened to me, whatever I was experiencing, they were already involved. I started walking toward the quarry. The wind had picked up, swirling around me in the trees, making the dead branches creak and groan. As I walked, down Old Miners Road, the same narrow, crumbling path we'd taken just hours ago, I felt like I was being pulled in. The trees seemed to lean closer, their limbs stretching like hands ready to grab me. The closer I got to the quarry, the more intense the feeling became. It was suffocating. I could barely breathe, but I pressed on, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the clearing near the entrance, the quarry seemed just as it had before. Silent, empty, as if waiting. But it was different now. I knew it was. I could feel it in my bones. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the quarry, where the darkness met the broken machinery, there was a figure, a man. His outline was barely visible, lost in the shadow, but I could see the shape of him. Tall, thin, and wrong. His posture was rigid, like a puppet on strings. His face was shadowed, but his eyes, I could feel them even though I couldn't see them. They were on me, watching me. I froze, not from fear, but from the terrible realization that I wasn't just seeing something. I was seeing him, the Hollow Man. I should have run. I should have turned around and never looked back, but I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the ground, my mind numb with disbelief. The Hollow Man didn't move. He just stood there, waiting, watching, and then I felt it, like a cold hand pressing down on my chest. Something was inside me now. Something had followed me, and it had marked me. I could feel it, the weight of it in my veins, the pressure in my head. My skin prickled, and I could feel the air grow colder around me, biting at my skin. The whisper came again, louder now, like a voice in my ear. Always. Suddenly everything changed. The air snapped sharp and painful. The world tilted. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, and I stumbled forward, my head spinning. The Hollow Man didn't move. He just kept watching me. And then, I noticed it. There was something on my hand, a mark. I looked down and my breath caught in my throat. A deep, jagged symbol had appeared, black as coal, etched into the skin of my palm. It looked almost like a burn, but there was no pain. It was just there, burned into me, and it felt wrong, like it had been there forever. I felt sick. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My hand shook, and the mark seemed to grow, spreading up my arm like roots sinking deeper into my skin. It burned, not physically, but mentally. I could feel its power, its malevolent presence inside me. The Hollow Man was still there, his eyes fixed on me. I couldn't look away. That's when I realized I wasn't just being haunted, I was being claimed. I turned and ran, my legs barely able to carry me, my breath ragged in my chest. The world spun around me as I sprinted through the woods, but it didn't matter. I knew it was following me. I knew it wouldn't stop until it had me. I had been marked, and there was no escaping now. When I finally reached my house, I slammed the door behind me, locking it twice. But even as I stood there, gasping for breath, I could feel the mark burning deeper, the Hollow Man's presence looming just beyond the walls. The thing in the quarry hadn't just followed me, it had chosen me, and now it wasn't going to let go. The days after the quarry were nothing but a blur. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. The mark on my hand hadn't faded, and neither had the weight of what I'd seen, what I'd felt. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the Hollow Man. Tall, dark, watching me. I could feel his eyes burning into me even when I wasn't looking. I tried to tell myself that it wasn't real, that maybe I was just going crazy, that it was some kind of panic-induced hallucination or a bad dream. But I knew better. I knew. I had been marked, and whatever force was behind that ancient place, whatever twisted thing had been waiting in the shadows of Black Hollow Quarry, it wasn't letting me go. Not now. Not ever. Ethan was starting to notice something was wrong. I had stopped leaving my room except to go to work, and even then I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Something was inside me. Something that moved in my veins and squeezed my chest until I couldn't breathe. He asked me what was going on one night while I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at my hands. I couldn't explain it to him. How could I? How could I tell him that something was inside me? Something dark, something ancient, something that didn't belong? I'm fine, I lied, my voice strained. Just a little stressed. You sure about that? Ethan asked, his brow furrowed. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You haven't been yourself lately, Lucas. You're distant. You're always looking over your shoulder like someone's following you. I couldn't answer. I didn't know how to tell him that I was being followed, that it wasn't just in my head. I had to get out. I couldn't stay in that house anymore, not with the whispers in the corners of the room, not with the mark growing darker, deeper, carving its way into my flesh. That's when I decided I had to find the others. I had to find Ryan, Jenna, and Mia. They were the only ones who could understand. They had to. Maybe we could stop it together. Maybe we could fight it. I drove to Ryan's house first. I knew he'd be up. He had this weird habit of staying up late, even when he knew he had to work the next day. The streetlights flickered above, casting eerie shadows on the road. It was quiet. Too quiet. When I knocked on his door, there was no answer. I knocked, again. Still nothing. My stomach twisted. I tried the door. It was unlocked. The heavy silence in the house sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped inside, calling Ryan's name. Nothing. I checked the kitchen, the living room, then the basement, all empty. No sign of him anywhere. I checked the garage, then the backyard, but still nothing. The whole house felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting. Finally, I made my way upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. Ryan's bedroom door was open a crack. Hesitantly, I pushed it open. And there he was. Ryan lay on, his bed eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. His body was stiff, his limbs rigid like he was frozen in place. And on his palm, the same mark I had. The same jagged symbol burned into his skin. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Ryan's eyes shifted just slightly to look at me. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared, those wide, empty eyes. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said the only thing that mattered. It's inside, always. The same words I'd heard in my house, in the quarry. The hollow man's voice. I turned, backing away from the bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stay in this place, in this house, surrounded by whatever it was that had marked us all. I rushed out of the room, down the stairs and out the front door. I barely noticed the car keys in my hand, the cold wind rushing past me as I fumbled to get in the car. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. I drove through the dark streets, aimless, not knowing where I was heading. My hands were shaking so hard that I could barely keep the wheel steady. The mark on my hand burned hot and sharp like it was alive, spreading through my body. It was becoming harder to breathe, harder to think. And then I saw it. A shadow darted across the road, too fast for me to track. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt. My heart was hammering in my chest as I stared out the windshield, my breath fogging up the glass. The shadow was gone, but I knew. I knew it was there, just out of sight. Watching. Waiting. I didn't know how much time passed after that. It felt like the world was closing in on me. Everything too dark, too silent. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I couldn't. And then through the window I saw him again. The hollow man. He stood at the edge of the street, tall and thin, his outline barely visible in the dark. His head tilted slightly, as if considering me. The same cold, dark presence that had followed me all this time. I tried to start the car, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I twisted the key again, my hands clammy, but it was useless. The car was dead, and so was I if I stayed there. I slammed the door open and ran, running back down the road, away from the hollow man, away from the mark, away from everything. Trees seemed to bend and sway around me, reaching out like hands trying to pull me back, but I kept running. I don't know how long I ran. I don't know if I'll ever stop running. The last thing I remember was the wind picking up, a cold chill that ripped through me. And then, just as I reached the edge of town, I heard it again. The whisper. The voice. Always. And then everything went dark. I woke up on the ground, my hands shaking, the world spinning around me. I was lying in the grass under the dark sky. My phone was beside me, but when I looked at it, the screen was cracked, and there was no signal. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around, I didn't need to. The hollow man had finally caught up, and this time there would be no escape. I'll never forget the first time I laid eyes on 17 Blackthorn Lane. There's something about a house that's been around long enough to accumulate stories. It was old, like most of the homes on Blackthorn Lane, but it had a presence, weight, that the others didn't have. The paint was peeling and the shingles on the roof were starting to curl at the edges. It looked like the house had been quietly withstanding the passage of time, as though it didn't care whether the world around it moved on or not. The Harlow family had moved in only a week before. Sarah, Noah's mother, was a nurse who liked to think of herself as a realist. David, Noah's dad, was a police officer, skeptical to the point of stubbornness. And then there was Mia, Noah's older sister, who had just started high school and had no time for anything that wasn't part of her world of friends and social media. Noah, though, was different. He was 8, and sensitive in a way that made him stand out even among other kids his age. He was quiet, but you could tell there was something heavy behind his eyes, something that made him look at the world a little more cautiously than most children did. The house, I think, already had its hold on him the moment they stepped through the front door. It wasn't the kind of place that welcomed you with open arms. The floors creaked underfoot and the air inside was thick, stale, like it had been locked away for too long. The smell wasn't bad, not exactly, but there was something old about it. Not just the house itself, but something in it. Something that had been there far longer than the Harlow family had. The story of 17 Blackthorn Lane started long before they moved in, of course. The house had once belonged to Elias Werner, a taxidermist who'd moved to Willow Creek in the 1930s. They say Werner was reclusive, that he didn't just preserve animals but collected things that weren't meant to be preserved. No one knew what exactly, but the whispers around town were enough to make people uneasy. When Werner vanished in 1952, just up and disappeared, without a trace, the house was abandoned for years. Over the decades, it changed owners many times. Each of them reported strange occurrences, cold spots, whispers in the dark, and the unsettling feeling that someone, or something, was always watching from the shadows. But no one stayed long enough to investigate. They left, and the house sat empty again until the Harlow family arrived. At first, the incidents were subtle. Sarah would find things moved around, objects slightly shifted in the kitchen or living room. Nothing major, but enough to make her pause and wonder if she'd misplaced something. But it wasn't just her. David would swear he heard someone walking around upstairs when no one was there, a soft, deliberate step that echoed in the stillness of the house at night. But the real turning point came when Noah, their youngest, started talking about it. He'd never been the type to make up stories. In fact, Noah was the type of kid who didn't say much at all unless it was important. So when he started insisting that a man stood in his closet every night, just watching him, it wasn't something Sarah could just dismiss. It began, as most things do, slowly. At first, Noah said it was just a dream. He told Sarah it was a bad one, the kind that made him wake up with his heart racing and his sheets tangled around him. But Noah had always been a good sleeper, never one to have nightmares, at least, not until they moved into the house on Blackthorn Lane. The thing about nightmares, though, is that they only go away when you wake up. But for Noah, there was no waking up. The man in his closet never left. He just stood there in the dark, staring at Noah with eyes that never blinked. Sarah tried to comfort him at first. She explained that it was just his imagination, that there was nothing in his room but his toys and his books. But when Noah refused to sleep in his room even after the lights were on, Sarah began to question what he was really seeing. It was Mia, Noah's older sister, who first noticed something wasn't right. It wasn't the same as Noah's insistence about the man in the closet, but Mia's cat, Whisper, had started acting strange. At first, it was just a little odd, the way Whisper would suddenly freeze in the middle of the room, staring at nothing with wide, unblinking eyes. But it didn't stop there. Whisper began hissing at empty corners, arching his back in terror and pacing restlessly in circles like something was just out of reach. Then, one night, Sarah woke up to something that froze her blood. It was the sound of fingernails dragging slowly down the inside of Noah's closet door. She lay there, still in the dark, heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it wasn't Noah. It wasn't his nails. It was something else. Something was in the closet, and it had been there for a long time. It was a cold, silent night when Sarah woke to the sound of the fingernails dragging along the inside of Noah's closet door. At first, it was so faint that she almost convinced herself it was nothing. A scratch. A gust of wind rattling the window. But then it happened again, more distinct this time. A slow, deliberate scrape that sent a chill straight to her bones. She froze, her heart beating too loudly in her chest. The air in the room felt thick and wrong, the kind of heaviness that clings to you when something isn't right, but you don't know what it is yet. She waited, eyes wide, trying to shake off the growing dread that something was about to happen. But nothing did. The scraping stopped. The room returned to its still, unsettling silence. She tried to dismiss it. It was late. She was tired. But the longer she lay there, listening to the deep, even breaths of Noah beside her, the more the sound gnawed at the edge of her mind. It wasn't natural. It wasn't just a simple creak from the house settling. It felt intentional, as if whatever was making that noise had been waiting for her to hear it. It wasn't until the morning that Sarah finally summoned the courage to check Noah's closet. It had been a restless night, her mind replaying the scrape, the eerie noise that wouldn't leave her. When she opened the door, she half expected to see something waiting for her, to find the source of the sound. But all she found was a mess of Noah's clothes and toys scattered haphazardly on the floor. There was no sign of anything unusual, no marks or scratches on the closet door. But then she looked at the closet hook. It was an old, rusted thing that had clearly been there for decades. As she ran her fingers over it, something caught her attention. The faintest outline of what looked like a scratch, deep and jagged, running down the wood just beside the hook. It was fresh, as if someone, or something, had been trying to claw its way out. Her breath caught in her throat. It was as though she could almost feel the weight of a presence lingering just behind her, watching her closely. Her skin prickled with the sense that she wasn't alone. "Mom?" Noah's voice broke through the haze of fear. He was standing in the doorway, eyes wide and unblinking, his face pale as he clutched his favorite stuffed animal, his security blanket against the unknown. "Sweetheart, you okay?" Sarah asked, forcing a smile, though it felt brittle on her face. She knelt beside him, trying to hold herself together. "What are you doing up?" Noah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced past her, toward the open closet door. His gaze was fixed, not on her, but on the darkness inside. Sarah followed his stare, feeling a tightness in her chest. "Mom?" Noah whispered, his voice low and shaky. "He's here." Sarah's heart sank. He wasn't just some imaginary friend, or a shadow in the corner of his mind. Noah had said this before, but something about his tone now, so serious, so fearful, made her stomach twist. "He's not here, Noah," Sarah replied softly, trying to reassure both him and herself. "There's nothing in the closet, you're just imagining it." But Noah didn't look convinced. He turned away from her and stepped closer to the closet, his eyes still fixed on the darkness inside. "He watches me at night," he said, his voice trembling. "He stands there right at the back of the closet. He doesn't talk. He just watches." The words hit Sarah like a punch in the gut. She reached out and gently took Noah's hand, pulling him away from the closet, but he resisted, his grip tightening. "Mom, please," he begged, his voice small and terrified. "I don't want to sleep in my room anymore. I don't like it." A knot tightened in Sarah's throat. She had been dismissing Noah's fears, chalking them up to an overactive imagination or some sort of childhood phase. But now, looking into his wide, terrified eyes, she realized that there was something else going on, something she couldn't explain. She glanced back at the closet door, the unsettling feeling creeping up on her once more. Was it just Noah's imagination, or was there something more to this? As if on cue, Whisper, the family's black cat, padded into the room. He seemed to pause, his ears perked up, eyes wide and unblinking. The cat had been acting strange lately, restless, twitching at nothing, staring into corners and hissing at invisible presences. Whisper's gaze shifted to the closet and he froze, his body stiffening. His pupils dilated to the size of pinpricks and he let out a low, guttural hiss, a sound that was more animalistic than anything Sarah had ever heard him make before. She followed his gaze, her pulse quickening as she looked back at the closet. There was nothing there, at least nothing she could see. But she could feel it, the same suffocating presence that had been growing steadily in the house, pressing in on her from all sides. Something was watching, waiting. "I don't like it here," Noah whispered, clinging to Sarah's side. She held him close, trying to calm him, but her own heart was racing. The closet door creaked like it was trying to open by itself, but no one had touched it. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. "Mom, what's happening?" Noah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah didn't have an answer. She didn't know what was happening, only that whatever it was real. And it wasn't going away. The days after that morning were the kind that sink under your skin and take root there, twisting with every glance into a corner, every creak of the floorboards. At first, Sarah tried to go about her life as usual. She was a nurse, after all. Dealing with the bizarre and the unexplainable was part of her job. But this was different. This wasn't something she could just diagnose or treat. There was no prescription for fear that clung to the walls like damp fog, no bandage for a heart that raced in the dead of night for reasons you couldn't explain. Sarah had seen the scratch on the closet door, and she had heard Noah's words. There, weight settled on her shoulders like a boulder she couldn't push away. Every night it felt like something was watching, waiting, and it wasn't just Noah anymore. Whisper the cat had started to act out of character more frequently. He would growl low in his throat and lash his tail at invisible things as if he could see what Sarah could not. It had started in Noah's room, but soon it spread. Late one evening, when Sarah passed the hallway by Mia's room, she saw Whisper sitting there, staring up at the ceiling as though he were tracking something, invisible. His fur was bristling, his body rigid with the tension of an unseen threat. Mia had seen it too, felt it as she put it. She didn't want to admit it, but when she confided in Sarah one evening, her voice was small, something Sarah had never heard before from her strong-willed daughter. "I hear it too, Mom," Mia confessed, standing at the edge of the kitchen, where the lights felt too bright. "Sometimes it's like I'm just about to fall asleep and I hear whispering. It's quiet at first, like it's far away, but then it gets louder, closer. I think it's from inside my closet, but when I open it, nothing's there. I know it sounds crazy." Sarah didn't know what to say. She'd felt it too, the coldness that crept through the house, the sense that something was wrong, but she couldn't let Mia see how much it terrified her. The last thing Mia needed was to feel as afraid as Noah did, and the last thing Sarah needed was to face the truth that there might be something real in that house, something far darker than they could imagine. That night, as Sarah went to bed, she lay staring at the ceiling, wide awake. The house felt different, heavy with something unseen. The silence was suffocating, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then, as the clock on the nightstand ticked past midnight, Sarah heard it, a soft, faint rustling sound. It was so subtle at first that she thought it was just the wind or perhaps the house settling, but it didn't stop. It came from down the hall near Noah's room. The sound of fabric brushing against fabric, or maybe fingers dragging across the walls. It was too quiet to be anything real, yet Sarah's heart raced, and her breath became shallow as she lay there, staring into the darkness. The sound came, again this time clearer. It was coming from the hallway, from Noah's room. Sarah sat up in bed, her mind a jumbled mess of questions. What could it be? The house? A loose floorboard? No, it wasn't that simple. She could feel it. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah swung her legs out of bed and quietly padded across the room toward the door. She cracked it open and glanced into the hallway. The darkness was thick, pressing against the walls, suffocating the light from the nearby hallway lamp. She stepped out cautiously, her footsteps soft on the old wooden floors. The house felt unnaturally quiet, and yet there was something else. Something underneath the silence, like a low hum of static that filled the air with tension. Noah's room was at the end of the hallway, and the closer Sarah got, the more the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She reached his door and hesitated, unsure if she wanted to go in. She could hear him breathing in the room, slow and steady. At least he was asleep. But still the feeling persisted, the sense that someone or something was in there with him. She opened the door just a crack, peering inside. Her heart skipped when she saw him lying in bed, clutching his stuffed animal, his body twisted in a way that made Sarah's breath catch. He was tangled in the sheets, his face turned toward the window. His eyes were wide open. "Noah," she whispered, stepping into the room. Her voice was barely a breath carried away by the still air. He didn't answer. In fact, he didn't even move. Sarah reached his bed, her feet heavy with the weight of the room pressing on her. As she leaned down to touch him, something caught her eye, something in the closet. The door was ajar, just slightly, the darkness inside so thick it felt as though it was seeping out into the room, pulling at her like a vacuum. It was then that she saw it, a shape in the corner of the closet just at the edge of her vision, hanging there. It was dark, solid, but not in the way shadows are. It was wrong. A shape that wasn't meant to be there. It didn't move, but it watched. She could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, cutting through the dark. Her breath hitched in her throat. She reached for Noah, shaking him gently. "Noah, wake up," she urged, panic creeping into her voice. But his body was unnaturally stiff. He didn't respond. The darkness in the closet shifted. It was then that Sarah saw the thing fully, as if it had been waiting for her to look. It was more than a shadow. It was a presence. A man. No, it was something worse. Something that had been in this house long before her family ever moved in. It watched. Before Sarah could pull Noah from the bed, she heard a voice, rasp, dry, almost a whisper, but undeniably real. It came from the corner of the room. "He's mine now." The voice was the last thing Sarah expected to hear. It was so soft, so quiet, that at first she wasn't sure if she had heard it at all. But it wasn't the kind of voice you could mistake. It was a rasping whisper, dry like sandpaper, and it wasn't coming from anywhere in particular. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. "He's mine now." Sarah froze. Her body went rigid, a cold wave of terror washing over her like ice water. It wasn't the voice of a person. It wasn't human. It was something else, and it was speaking directly to her. She turned to Noah, still lying motionless in the bed. His face was pale, his eyes wide open but glazed over. He didn't blink. He didn't even move. He was frozen, like a marionette with its strings cut. No, Sarah, thought panic flooding her chest. She reached down to shake him again, harder this time, her fingers trembling. But Noah didn't respond. His skin felt unnaturally cold, his body stiff as though something was holding him down from the inside. Her eyes snapped back to the closet, the air in the room thick and pressing like it was about to snap. The darkness inside was deeper than it had ever been. It had a weight to it, pulling at her, urging her to look closer. But Sarah didn't want to look closer. She didn't want to know what was in there. But something in her, some primal instinct, made her eyes drift back to the corner of the closet, and that's when she saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, just a dark shape standing unnaturally still, hovering just at the edge of the closet. But it wasn't a shadow, not like the ones that moved naturally with the dim light. This thing, this presence, was darker than the darkness around it, solid and massive. It didn't blend with the room, it was other. Its edges were jagged, as though the darkness itself was bleeding into the form of a man. Sarah couldn't breathe. Her lungs seized up in her chest, and her head spun as she took a step back, her feet unsteady. She wanted to run, but she couldn't. Her feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. Her vision blurred as she blinked rapidly, as though trying to shake the thing out of existence. But it didn't work. The shadow was still there, still watching. The thing in the closet was enormous, though it didn't move. It was like it was carved from the darkness itself, its presence growing by the second. It was the dark. The air in the room grew thick, with something foul, the stench of something old, like rotting leaves mixed with the sharp tang of iron. The voice came again, but this time it was louder, sharper. "He's mine. You can't save him." "He's already mine," Sarah gasped, her hands trembling as she reached for her phone in her pocket. She tried to call David. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. She was frozen, unable to move, her body locked in place by the oppressive force in the room. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, but there was no answer. David was out on patrol, and she was alone with whatever this was. The whispering, that low, rasping voice, continued to fill the room, echoing around her, pressing against her ears like a physical thing. "He doesn't belong to you. He's mine now." Her eyes were locked on the thing in the closet. It had no discernible shape, no distinct features. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything from this world. But it was something, and that something wanted Noah. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah finally managed to break free from the paralysis, her body jerking as if snapping out of a trance. She lunged forward, grabbing Noah's shoulder, shaking him with desperate urgency. "Noah!" she screamed, her voice breaking, her hands gripping him harder than she meant to. But Noah didn't respond. He remained lifeless, his body unyielding, his skin colder with every second that passed. The thing in the closet moved. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air, a ripple in the darkness. Then, Sarah saw it. The shape in the closet stretched toward her, its form elongating unnaturally like something that shouldn't exist, moving in ways that couldn't be explained by physics. The air around her seemed to pulse, like the house itself was holding its breath. The closet door, which had been slightly ajar, creaked and groaned as though something was pressing against it from the inside. The shadow. It was coming for her. In a desperate frenzy, Sarah pulled Noah into her arms, cradling him against her chest, willing him to wake up. The weight of the shadow pressed closer, pushing against the edges of her mind. The whisper was louder now, like a constant ringing in her ears. "He belongs to me now." Suddenly, the shadow lunged. It shot forward in a blur of motion, faster than Sarah's eyes could follow. And in that instant, something deep inside her snapped. With a guttural scream, she shoved Noah to the side and lunged at the closet, desperate to face whatever this was head-on. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was acting on pure instinct, fueled by a mixture of terror and motherly fury. Her hand gripped the closet door, and with all the strength she could muster, she slammed it shut, the force rattling the walls. For a moment, everything was still. The shadow, the presence, the whispers. They all fell silent. Sarah stood there, breathless, her hands shaking violently as she crouched beside Noah. Her mind reeled, fighting to make sense of what had just happened. Had it been real? Or was she losing her mind? But Noah wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. Her heart lurched painfully in her chest as she bent closer to him. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling for a pulse. There was nothing. Her blood ran cold. Noah was gone. And then, just as the weight of the moment sank in, a cold, whispering voice slithered through the cracks of the door. "He's mine. He was always mine." Sarah's head spun. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. But one thing was painfully clear. Whatever had been inside the closet was still there, and it wasn't done with her yet. The darkness in the room felt different now, thicker, as if it had gathered around Sarah, pressing down on her like a suffocating weight. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, drowning out every other sound. Noah's cold, lifeless body lay motionless on the floor beside her. The silence was deafening. The whispering had stopped, but the air itself seemed to vibrate with something wrong, something ancient. Sarah's hands were trembling as she reached for her phone again. She was trying to get a grip on her breath, but it felt like the room was spinning, the edges of her vision blurring. David, she thought. David needs to be here. She fumbled for the phone, almost dropping it in her panic. Her fingers shook as she dialed, but this time, the call didn't go through. The phone buzzed, a tiny, pathetic failure as the screen blinked, and then the call abruptly dropped. Her throat tightened, fear blooming into something worse. The signal's gone, no one can help. The oppressive presence in the room was closing in on her, the air growing colder, denser. Her mind reeled. How had this happened? Had she imagined the shadow in the closet? Had it really been there, or was it her exhaustion playing tricks on her? But the coldness of Noah's body, the way his eyes stared through her, unblinking and lifeless, told her the truth. Whatever had taken him, whatever had taken them all, wasn't over. Sarah stood, her legs weak, her chest tightening as she slowly backed away from the body on the floor. The closet door loomed like an open wound across the room. It seemed to pull at her, begging her to open it, to look inside. It was as though something was waiting just beyond her reach, something in the shadows that needed her to come closer. She didn't dare. She couldn't. But then she heard it, a soft tapping on the walls, a faint rattle like the breath of an old man, dry and brittle, scraping against the air. The sound crawled over her skin, prickling every inch of her body, with the creeping sensation of being watched. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. There was no escape. It had her. She had been chosen. For the first time, she turned to face the thing in the closet. It had been quiet for too long, but she could feel its presence. She knew with sickening certainty that it was still there. She could hear the faintest rustle of fabric, the scraping of claws against wood. Whatever it was moving, shifting, waiting for her to make her next mistake. Sarah felt the walls of the room close in around her. Her breath was coming in short, panicked bursts. She stumbled back toward the door, eyes darting between the lifeless form of Noah and the dark space of the closet. She couldn't stay here. Not anymore. Her fingers gripped the doorknob, twisting it with frantic desperation, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. No, not locked, but sealed. The doorknob turned, but didn't open. She yanked at it, panic bubbling up her throat. The coldness in the room intensified. Her breath came out in sharp gasps, her chest tight, and then she saw, how the closet door creaked open. It was slow at first, like a drawn-out sigh, a sound that felt far too deliberate. The darkness inside the closet stretched impossibly deep, as though the shadows had taken on a life of their own. And then she saw it again, the shape, the silhouette, standing motionless in the corner. But now, it moved. A long, thin arm reached out, impossibly long, a pale, twisted hand stretching toward her, fingers tapering into claws. The thing in the closet wasn't human. It never had been. It was an amalgamation of darkness, hunger, and age. Its fingers crawled along the floor, inching closer to her, and Sarah's heart stopped. It's coming for me. In that instant, something primal broke free within her, a burst of raw, animalistic instinct. She screamed, a sound that ripped from her throat, raw and wild, as she shoved her shoulder against the door, pushing with everything she had. But nothing happened. The door remained sealed, the closet remained open, and that thing, whatever it was still coming toward her, crawling toward her with movements that defied everything she knew about the world. I can't die here. I can't die in this house. Reached into the darkness of her mind, searching for anything, any way out. But there was nothing. The house felt alive, an ancient beast that fed on fear. It didn't care who she was, what she thought. It was going to take her just like it had taken Noah, and Mia, and every other soul unlucky enough to cross its path. He's mine now, the voice whispered again, in that same dry rasp, as if it were close, but also very far away. An echo, coming from every corner of the room at once. And then she saw it. A face. A face emerging from the shadows, emerging from the darkness that surrounded the closet. It was his face. Elias Werner. The man who had built this house, the man whose twisted obsession with death had seeped into the walls themselves. His skin was pale and stretched tight over the bones of his skull. His eyes were wide, unblinking, hollow voids of blackness. And his lips were moving. His voice filled her head like a drumbeat. He was always mine. And then she understood. The house. Elias. The thing in the closet, it wasn't just a spirit. It wasn't just a ghost or a monster, it was a collector. A predator that waited patiently for souls to wander into its grasp. And it didn't let go. It's not just the house. It's me now. Sarah's mind splintered as she realized what had happened. The house, the whispers, the shadow. It had all been leading to this. It had chosen her. The last thing Sarah saw was the thing in the closet reaching toward her, its clawed fingers grazing her cheek, cold as the grave. The darkness swallowed her whole. David Harlow returned home that night, his steps heavy on the front porch as he approached the door. He had been gone for hours, and his unease only grew as he fumbled with the keys, not understanding the dread that was creeping in around him. The front door opened with an odd resistance, like something was pushing back from the other side. Inside, the house was silent. Too silent. He called out for Sarah, but there was no answer. The air in the house felt cold. He moved through the rooms, his heart beginning to race. His eyes landed on the kitchen table where the family photo frame sat. A picture of Sarah and Noah, Mia and him, smiling together before they had moved into this cursed house. But now, Noah was gone from the photo. There was a chill in the air, thick with something that smelled of damp earth and something older. David didn't know it yet, but the house was waiting for him, and soon he would understand the price of silence. The thing in the dark hadn't finished collecting. I'd always been the kind of guy who laughed at ghost stories. You know the type. Skeptical, logical, and stubborn in the face of anything that seemed irrational. I wasn't the kind of guy who'd pay much attention to the rumors about haunted hotels or cursed places. When I set out for Bisbee, Arizona for the weekend, the Copper Queen Hotel wasn't exactly the kind of place I expected to find myself. But there I was, checking into a 100-year-old hotel with my fiancée, Julia, because the place had a charm that spoke to her in ways I didn't understand. The Copper Queen Hotel was a relic from a bygone era. Built in 1902, it had all the hallmarks of a once thriving destination for miners and gamblers: grand staircases, heavy curtains, and a dusty scent that never quite went away. But as soon as we entered the lobby, something didn't sit right. The walls were adorned with old photographs of miners, some of whom I later learned were long gone, victims of deadly accidents and even suicides, with rumors swirling about the tragic stories behind them. There were whispers of the bellboy who fell down the elevator shaft in 1927, the little girl named Annie who vanished on the staircase in 1934, and of course the whispers of those who had never truly left. At first, Julia seemed enchanted by the hotel. She kept mentioning how charming it was, how quaint the place felt, but I could see the slight tension in her eyes, the way she glanced around like she was waiting for something to happen. I dismissed it as nothing more than the weight of the hotel's history bearing down on her, but even I couldn't ignore the unsettling vibe of the place as we walked down the narrow corridor to our room. When we reached room 315, I instantly felt the air thicken, like I was stepping into something too heavy to fully comprehend. The room had an eerie stillness to it, almost as if it hadn't been touched in years. Julia seemed to notice it too, but she brushed it off with a nervous laugh. I figured she was just being dramatic. After all, we were on vacation. But that night things began to get strange. I woke up at some point in the middle of the night to the unmistakable sound of footsteps, the kind of slow, deliberate pacing that makes your skin crawl. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, assuming it was just the building settling. But the footsteps continued, as if someone was walking back and forth just outside our door. I looked at Julia, but she was still sound asleep. I listened closer and realized that it wasn't just the sound of footsteps, it was a presence. It felt as though someone was standing just outside, watching, waiting. I got out of bed and cautiously walked to the door, only to find nothing. No one in the hallway, just empty rooms stretching into darkness. I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The next morning, Julia mentioned that she'd heard something too. Child's voice humming a tune right beside her bed. But when she turned around, there was nothing. She didn't seem afraid, just unsettled. We decided to leave as soon as we could. After all, it was just a weird night. We'd be out of there by the afternoon. But there was still something that didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel wasn't just haunted by the past, it was alive, feeding off the stories and tragedies that had occurred within its walls. But I told myself it was probably just my imagination running wild. After all, I didn't believe in ghosts. At least, not yet. As we checked out the next morning, I noticed something strange. In the elevator's reflection, I saw a pale figure in a bellboy uniform. He didn't seem to be moving, just standing there watching us. When I blinked, he was gone. I thought it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. Julia didn't seem to notice. I shrugged it off, trying to convince myself that there was nothing to worry about. But I was wrong. The Copper Queen Hotel had already marked us. The things that had once lived there had attached themselves to us. And we were about to learn that some things don't just stay behind when you check out. When we left Bisbee the next morning, I thought we were done with it. The hotel, the unsettling footsteps, the voices that didn't belong, all of it felt like a distant memory. But the strange thing about memories is that they have a way of lingering, even when you're sure they're behind you. The Copper Queen didn't let go of us that easily. The first sign that something wasn't right came a few days after we returned home to Tucson. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was sitting at my desk in the small office I worked from, flipping through travel brochures. Julia was in the living room reading one of her crime novels. The dog, Rufus, was lying at my feet, his nose twitching, every now and then. It was a typical evening, then I heard it. At first it was faint, a small sound in the background. I thought it was Julia dropping something, or maybe the dog scratching at the floor. But it wasn't. It was a soft humming, like a child's lullaby. The sound came from behind me, just over my shoulder. I froze, my fingers still hovering over the keyboard. Rufus's ears perked up and he started to whimper softly. The humming continued for a moment before it stopped suddenly. I turned around, expecting to find Julia standing there, maybe with a glass of wine or a book in her hand, but she wasn't there. The living room door was shut and there was no sign of her, just the dim light from the hallway and the faint hum of the fridge. I brushed it off. Maybe I was just hearing things, I thought. Maybe I was tired, overworked, but something about it unsettled me. I couldn't shake the thought that it was something more than just a sound, like it was deliberately aimed at me, meant to get my attention. The next day, the weirdness started to escalate. I was in the middle of a meeting with a client when I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. The temperature in the room had dropped. I could see my breath. My client didn't seem to notice, but I was fighting the urge to look around and make sure no one else was there. The feeling was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but something about the room felt off, like there was an invisible presence that was just waiting. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, hoping to shake the strange sensation. As soon as I left the room, the coldness lifted, but the sense of being watched didn't. That evening, as we were finishing dinner, I casually mentioned the odd things I'd been feeling to Julia. She didn't say anything at first, just chewing her food and staring at her plate. But then, after a long pause, she finally spoke. "I've been feeling it too, Ethan." I stopped mid-bite, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, glancing nervously toward the hallway. "The other night I heard the humming too, and I keep seeing blah things in the reflection of the windows or in the corner of my eye. It's like there's something there, but when I look directly at it, It's gone." She looked at me, and for the first time since we'd left the Copper Queen, I saw fear in her eyes. It wasn't like her. Julia was practical, grounded, skeptical, just like me, but now she wasn't so sure. I think something came with us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. At that moment, I thought about the bellboy in the elevator, the strange figure standing motionless, staring at us through the reflection. Had he followed us home? Or was it something else? Something we hadn't noticed in the hotel? Something we'd left behind, but it had found its way into our world anyway. We decided to leave the lights on that night, all of them. The overhead lights, the lamps, even the porch light outside. It was a futile attempt to push back the creeping shadows that were beginning to take shape in our home. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, that it was all in our heads. But then I saw it again. It was just after midnight and I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. Julia was next to me, sound asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I turned my head to the side, and that's when I saw it. Standing at the end of the bed, just past the doorway. A tall, shadowy figure, blacker than the dark, staring at me with empty eyes. It didn't move, didn't blink. It just watched. I held my breath, hoping it would disappear, but it didn't. I turned my head quickly to wake Julia, but when I looked back, the figure was gone. I rushed to the door, flicking on the hallway light, but there was nothing there. Julia woke up to find me standing in the doorway, shaking. "What's wrong?" she asked groggily. "Did you see it?" "There was something in the hallway," I said, my voice tight. "Something watching us." Julia sat up, her face pale. "Ethan, I swear I heard it too. It was in the hallway. I thought I was imagining it. I didn't know how to explain it. All I knew was that whatever had followed us from Bisbee wasn't just a figment of our imagination. It was real, and it wasn't going anywhere. The Copper Queen Hotel had marked us, and now we were trapped with the echoes of its ghosts. They were here, and they weren't leaving. The next few days felt like they were crawling by in slow motion. Each time I stepped into the apartment, I couldn't shake the heavy, suffocating feeling of being watched. Every corner seemed to harbor something just beyond my sight, lurking in the shadows. It was like the walls themselves were breathing, pulsing with a rhythm that was somehow wrong. Julia was quieter too. I could tell she was trying to keep it together for me, but the strain was showing. She kept glancing nervously over her shoulder, even during the day. Every time she passed the hallway mirror, she would pause, stare at her reflection, and quickly turn away. I couldn't blame her. After what we'd experienced, we both knew there was something out there with us, and I think we both feared that talking about it would make it real, in a way that we couldn't control. That's when the dreams started. Adding to you. First, they were just fragments, disjointed images that didn't make sense. But over time, the dreams became more vivid, more coherent. Every night, I found myself standing in the same hallway, the one just outside our bedroom. The walls were too tall, and the air was thick with a sense of wrongness. At the end of the hall was a door, cracked open, with dim light spilling out, but I couldn't see what was on the other side. I would try to move toward it, but my feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. The darkness around me would stretch, creeping in, and I could hear whispers, low, guttural murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The worst part of the dream was the feeling of being followed. I could never look behind me, but I knew something was there, always right behind me. And when I finally managed to turn around, there was only darkness, deep and endless, with a pair of glowing eyes in the center, just watching. I woke up sweating, heart pounding, every time. The dreams bled into my waking hours, creeping into my thoughts like a slow spreading fog. One afternoon, I had to take a trip for work, a small assignment in Phoenix. Julia didn't want to stay behind, but I insisted it would be good for both of us to get out of the apartment, even for a few hours. I thought I might find a way to shake this feeling, clear my head. Maybe a change of scenery would help. But when I came back that evening, everything was wrong. The door to our apartment was ajar. At first, I thought I might have left it unlocked in my rush to leave, but as soon as I stepped inside, the feeling hit me. It had been opened while I was gone. I could sense it, the disruption. It wasn't just the door. It was the air inside, thicker, colder somehow. I called out for Julia, but there was no response. The silence made my skin prickle. I moved further into the apartment, my footsteps heavy on the floor. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, jittery shadows on the walls. When I reached the living room, I found her sitting on the couch, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring blankly at the TV that wasn't even on. "Julia?" I said softly, trying to hide the growing unease in my voice. She didn't respond. Her eyes were wide, glassy but unfocused. It was like she wasn't seeing me. She wasn't seeing anything. She was just staring. I rushed over to her, shaking. Her shoulders gently. "Hey, what's going on? Talk to me." Finally, her eyes snapped to mine, and for a moment, it was like she didn't recognize me. Then, slowly, her lips parted, but it wasn't her voice that came out. It was a low, rasping whisper, like something was inside her pushing the words out. "He's always watching." I recoiled, my heart slamming against my chest. The sound of her voice, no, it wasn't right. It was the same voice I'd heard in the hallway that night. The one from the dark corner, the one from my dreams. The same whispers that had followed us. I pulled her into my arms, trying to snap her out of it, but she didn't respond. She was there, but she wasn't. Her body was rigid, unyielding, like it wasn't hers anymore. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. They echoed down the hallway, each step seeming to grow closer until they were right behind me. My heart stopped as I turned slowly, half expecting to see something there, something that shouldn't be. But when I looked, there was nothing. Only the long, empty hallway that led to the darkened bathroom, the kitchen, the bedrooms. I turned, back to Julia. Her eyes were still locked on me, wide and unblinking, but her mouth was moving again as if someone, or something, was speaking through her. "You can't leave. It's already here." I felt the blood drain from my face. The air felt thick, like I couldn't breathe properly. My fingers clung to Julia's shoulders as I tried to hold her still, but the weight of it, the pressure from every corner of the room, was unbearable. The whispers were louder now, and they weren't coming from Julia. They were coming from the walls. I couldn't take it any longer. I had to get out. I had to get away. But where could I go? The Copper Queen hadn't just haunted us. It had attached itself to us. It was with us now, always in the corners of our vision, in the reflections of the windows, in the things that shouldn't be there. We weren't going to escape it. We never had a chance, and I knew deep down that it would only get worse from here. It's been a few days since that night, but the shadows are still here. Not just in the apartment, but in my mind too. I can't stop seeing them. Flashes of movement at the edges of my vision, a figure in the reflection of a window or a mirror. I can't trust the quiet anymore. Even the silence is unsettling now. Julia, she's not the same. I don't know what happened to her when she slipped into that trance. Her eyes have changed, distant, hollow. She hasn't spoken much, just goes through the motions, eating when I put food in front of her, sleeping. But her sleep is restless, filled with murmurs. I hear her whispering at night sometimes. Not words, just low, almost like a chant. I've been trying to piece together what we experienced at the Copper Queen. I dug through some old archives about the hotel's history, about the spirits that supposedly haunt it. Most of the stories were just local folklore, exaggerations to entertain tourists. But there was something about the mention of the ones who follow that stuck with me. Apparently, the spirits don't just stay at the hotel. They follow people, guests who linger too long, who look a little too closely at the dark corners of the rooms. They attach themselves, hitch a ride like parasites feeding off fear, and they never really leave. It wasn't until I found a local named Helen who used to work at the hotel that I began to understand the true depth of what we were facing. She's lived in Bisbee her whole life, and she knew the history of the Copper Queen better than anyone. She told me about the bellboy, how he died in 1927, falling down the elevator shaft. She told me how Annie, the little girl who disappeared in 1934, wasn't the only child to vanish. There were others, children who had come to the hotel with their parents, children who had wandered off and never returned. The bellboy, she said, was a watcher who had become trapped in the hotel, and Annie was just one of the lost souls that kept him company. But what struck me most was when Helen spoke of the others. She didn't call them ghosts. She called them shadows, dark figures that followed certain people home. They didn't take physical form in the same way the spirits did. They were more like impressions, a presence you couldn't escape. And once they found you, they would slowly begin to invade every part of your life. The hair on the back of my neck stood up when I heard that. I asked her how to stop it, how to get rid of them. Helen just shook her head, her wrinkled face growing even more somber. "You can't get rid of them," she said, her voice quivering. "Once they latch onto you, it's too late. They'll follow you forever. They feed off your fear. The more you try to escape them, the stronger they get. There's only one way to stop them from hurting you." She paused, her eyes locking with mine. "You stop being afraid." I didn't believe her at first. How could I? But then, last night something happened that made me reconsider. Julia and I were in bed, the room dim and quiet. I was staring at the ceiling trying to find sleep when I heard it. Soft tapping like fingernails on wood just beyond the door. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. And then, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing down the hallway. My heart raced, but I didn't move, I didn't speak, I couldn't bring myself to. I heard a whispering too, not in Julia's voice, but from somewhere else. I strained my ears to make it out, but it was just a low, static-like hum at first, and then a few words drifted through. "Come closer." I froze, the blood draining from my face. The words came from behind the door, but there was no one there. There couldn't be. I had checked every inch of the apartment, all the locks, all the windows. Then Julia stirred. I could feel her shift beside me, but her body felt colder than usual, like she wasn't really there. I turned my head and found her staring at the door, her eyes wide, unblinking. She didn't move, but I could see her lips moving ever so slightly. "Ethan, they're here." I couldn't breathe. I reached for her, shaking her shoulder. "Julia? Julia, look at me." Her head jerked toward me then, her eyes suddenly alive with terror. She grabbed my wrist with a grip that was too tight, too cold. She whispered, barely above a breath. "I saw them. They're in the hall. They're waiting for us to open the door." I didn't wait. I pulled her to her feet and ran for the door. But as I reached for the handle, the door slammed shut on its own, as if something was holding it from the other side. I turned, my heart in my throat, and saw something that made my blood run cold. In the dark corner of the room, there was a figure, a tall, thin silhouette, almost human but not quite. It didn't move, it didn't blink, it just watched us. That was when I knew we weren't alone. Not anymore. It didn't matter where we went. It didn't matter how far we ran. The shadows had followed us. And now, they were here to stay. The air in the apartment grew thick with dread. Every corner felt like it was hiding something, and every creak of the floorboard sent a jolt through my spine. I wanted to leave. Hell, I needed to leave. But no matter where I looked, the exit always felt just out of reach. And the shadows, they didn't just lurk anymore, they moved. I could feel them, like a weight pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Julia's hand was still cold on my wrist, her grip tightening with every passing second. She was staring at the corner of the room, where the shadow stood, unmoving, like a forgotten relic of something older, something not quite human. Her lips quivered, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. The terror in her eyes said everything I needed to know. "They're here, Ethan," she whispered, barely audible. "They're in the apartment. They're waiting. I could hear the buzz of static in the air, as though the world around us was filled with a low hum, just loud enough to make it impossible to focus. My mind spun. I wanted to make a plan, to think logically, but the more I tried, the less clear things became. I felt like I was losing control, like I was drowning in fear. "Julia," I said, my voice trembling. "We have to get out. We can't stay here." But when I turned to the door again, I froze. The shadow that had been in the corner was now standing in front of the door. It was no longer just a shape. This time I could see its outline more clearly. It was tall and thin, like a person, but its features were obscured by an unnatural, inky blackness that seemed to bleed into the walls. And its eyes, they were like burning coals, glowing with an eerie light. They stared right through me like it could see every part of my soul, and it knew exactly what I was thinking. I took a step back, my legs shaking, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I felt a tremor in the floor beneath my feet, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. My breath fogged in the air. The static was deafening now, buzzing in my ears, pushing in on my skull, making everything feel distorted. I swallowed hard. "Julia!" I didn't get to finish the sentence. That's when I heard it. The whispering. It wasn't just in my head this time. The voices were in the room with us. Low, guttural, like wind through the cracks of an old building. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone, sharp, commanding, was unmistakable. "You shouldn't have left," one voice said, its rasp like nails scraping across glass. The hairs on my arms stood up. It was as if the voice had come from right behind me, but when I spun around, no one was there. A second voice followed, just as chilling. "You are ours now." My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. The air felt heavier, thicker, and the room seemed to close in on me. I looked back at Julia. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, locked onto the shadow in front of the door. She was muttering something under her breath, but it wasn't words. It was more like a chant, a desperate prayer, like she was trying to convince herself that whatever was happening wasn't real. But I could see it. It was real. I backed away slowly, still holding onto her wrist, trying not to make any sudden movements. My mind was racing, but there was no logical explanation for any of this. I was out of options, and the darkness seemed to press closer, its grip tightening with each second. Then the bellboy appeared. Not in the physical sense, not in the way I had seen him in the hotel, but in the reflection of the old mirror on the wall. His pale, lifeless eyes stared back at me, and his mouth twisted into an eerie smile, a smile that didn't belong in this world. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, and when I pulled up the picture from Julia's text earlier, my blood ran cold. In the reflection of the elevator doors, the bellboy was smiling. He wasn't just smiling, his hand was on her shoulder. A small, pale hand, not Julia's, they follow. The voice in my head was clearer now, but it wasn't just in my head. It was as if the words came from everywhere, from the walls, the floor, the air itself. I didn't know what to do. There were no solutions, no way out. We were trapped, caught, between this world and the next. And then it hit me, the realization that we were never meant to escape. The spirits, the shadows, the ones who followed us, they weren't trying to hurt us. Not at first. They were simply waiting for the right moment, for the fear to overtake us. They were parasites, feeding off the terror we felt as we tried to fight against them. The more we resisted, the stronger they became. In a fit of desperation, I ran for the door, slamming my shoulder into it. But it didn't budge, it wouldn't budge. The pressure on my chest was suffocating, and my mind was screaming for release, for something, anything, to make it stop. And then, as if the room itself had given up, I heard a laugh, a child's laugh. It echoed through the apartment, small and high-pitched like Annie's laugh from the hotel. But now it was louder, clearer. It was in the air, in the walls, in me. Julia screamed. I turned to her, and the last thing I saw was her face, twisted in fear, her mouth opening as if to scream, but no sound coming out. The darkness enveloped her, swallowing her whole. I tried to run, but the shadow moved too fast. It was everywhere now. In the corners, in the reflections, in the air I breathed. I never made it out of the apartment. I don't know how long it's been since that night. I don't know what's real anymore. All I know is that they're still here, watching, waiting, and I can feel them every time I close my eyes. They're waiting for me to stop being afraid, waiting for me to accept it. I wonder how long it will take before I do. I had never thought much about Holloway Road. It's one of those places that you drive by 100 times without really paying attention, like any other street in any other small town. Blackridge, Vermont, isn't exactly a tourist destination, and Holloway Road is at the very edge of it. It's just a narrow, cracked street lined with overgrown trees that seem to reach out at you when the wind blows. People don't really live on Holloway Road, not in any proper sense. The few houses that do line the street are either abandoned or too decrepit to be worth much. I always heard stories about it being haunted, but it was the kind of thing you let slide past you, like the way people joke about the full moon making people go crazy. Then, one night, everything changed. I was 24 then, just a regular guy with a regular job as a mechanic at a shop down by Main Street. My best friend Dylan, he's a little younger than me, always used to joke about how creepy Blackridge was. We'd hang out at the diner late into the night, munching on greasy fries and washing them down with bad coffee, all while making fun of the people who swore this town was full of ghosts and strange happenings. Yeah, man, people around here are seriously off their rockers. Dylan would laugh, shaking his head. He was a believer in the strange and supernatural, while I was a skeptic, mostly because it was easier to laugh at things than to be scared of them. But on that night, October 30th, everything changed. Dylan and I had just left the diner around 2 a.m. The chill in the air bit at our skin, but the streets were mostly deserted, the kind of stillness that only comes when the world's asleep. We were heading home, taking our usual shortcut along Holloway Road, talking about work, life, and everything in between. I was cracking a joke about my boss when Dylan suddenly stopped in his tracks. I didn't think much of it at first. Dylan is always jumping at shadows, his imagination running wild. But when I turned to ask what was up, I saw it too. A shadow. It wasn't like the shadows you expect to see at night, cast by the flickering streetlights or the trees. This thing was different. It wasn't tied to anything, like it existed outside of reality somehow. It was long and thin, gliding horizontally across the driveway of 47 Holloway. It wasn't walking or moving in any way that I could comprehend. It was like the thing was just floating, drifting through the air as if it had no need for feet or gravity. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no, it was there. A black mass, too smooth, too fluid, stretching out from one side of the driveway to the other. The thing didn't seem to care that there was a world around it. It just moved, purposefully, like it knew exactly where it was going. It didn't pause or hesitate. It just moved from one end of the driveway to the other, as if it was a part of the night itself. I wanted to say something, to break the silence, but the words stuck in my throat. Dylan, who was standing next to me, didn't speak either. His eyes were wide, locked on the same thing I was staring at. I could feel the panic crawling up my spine, the realization that something wasn't right. This wasn't just some trick of the light. Then, in a heartbeat, it stopped. The thing froze, hanging there in the air for one endless second. And in that second, I swear to God, it turned its head toward us. It didn't have a face, not really. At least not one I could recognize, but I knew it was aware of us. Its black, featureless form tilted in our direction, like it was studying us, sizing us up. I could feel its gaze, heavy, suffocating, like something pressing down on me, forcing my breath to catch. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The shadow simply slipped away at the edge of the streetlight's reach, as if it had never been there in the first place. We both stood there frozen, staring at the spot where it had been. The only sound that filled the air was the soft rustle of the trees and the distant hum of the town. Then, the smell hit us, It wasn't a smell I could place at first, but it was like the scent of burnt wood mixed with something sweeter, something more unsettling. The faintest whiff of old hymns, of a place long forgotten, lingered in the air. It was as if the shadow had left a mark on the very earth, a signature from a time when things had burned. I turned to Dylan, and he turned to me. Both of us still in shock. What the hell was that? He whispered, his voice trembling. I don't know, I replied, my own voice tight in my chest. I was trying to reason with myself, trying to dismiss what had just happened, but it was hard. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe we both just imagined it. But deep down, I knew we hadn't. We were both quiet as we kept walking, but the silence between us felt heavier than it ever had before. Something was different now. Something had seen us. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't finished with us yet. We didn't speak much after that night. Dylan and I kept to ourselves, barely exchanging more than a few words as we walked home, our usual banter replaced by the weight of what had happened. The streets seemed quieter than usual. The hum of the streetlights felt distant, like a faint memory from another time. The shadows, deeper now, seemed to stretch further than they had before. The once familiar creak of old houses settled unnervingly into a silence I couldn't explain. The next morning, the sun rose as if everything had gone back to normal. People were up and about. The usual humdrum of Blackridge's daily life continued on. But the air felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. Dylan sent me a text later that day, asking if I'd heard anything strange during the night. His message came through around noon, but I couldn't bring myself to reply immediately. I was still trying to process what had happened. The more I thought about it, the less sure I was of what I had actually seen. I kept replaying it in my mind. The smooth, fluid motion of that shadow, its unnatural glide across the driveway, the way it had paused and locked its attention on us. But even as I questioned myself, one thing kept nagging at me. It had seen us. It knew we were there. I called Dylan later that afternoon. "Hey man, you good?" I asked. "I don't know." Dylan's voice crackled through the phone, a mix of exhaustion and unease. "I didn't sleep last night. I couldn't stop thinking about it, the way it moved, the way it watched us. I didn't have an answer for him. What could I say? We'd seen it. We both had. There was no denying that." We met up later that night at the usual diner. The place was nearly empty, the hum of the overhead lights mingling with the distant clinking of silverware. The waitress, a girl we knew from high school, greeted us with a smile, but even she couldn't hide the tension in her eyes. She asked if we'd heard anything strange about Holloway Road recently. Dylan nodded before I could answer, his face pale. "The old church that burned down? I guess some people around here think it never really burned down. They say it's still there under the ground waiting," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You didn't see anything last night, did you?" We both stiffened. I was about to say something, to laugh it off. But then the memory of the shadow crept back in, how it had glided across the driveway, how it had turned its head toward us, how it had seemed alive in a way nothing should. I couldn't dismiss it as easily as I had before. "Just don't go back down there, okay?" the waitress added, her voice barely audible. "People who've messed around near that spot, they don't come back the same. You're not the first to see it, and you won't be the last." We didn't have an answer. What could we say? The air in the diner felt thick, heavier somehow, as though we were suffocating under the weight of the town's history. That night, when Dylan and I split up to head home, the unease followed me. I could feel it in my bones, a coldness in the air that shouldn't have been there. I could see it in the streetlights as I walked down Holloway Road again, the glow from the bulbs flickering just as it had the night before. The darkness pressed, closer to me, not just in the trees, but everywhere. I reached my house and paused at the end of my driveway. The wind had picked up, and the leaves danced in circles around me. I felt watched. It was an unsettling sensation, like the very ground beneath me had become aware of my presence. The second I walked through the door, I heard the sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't something that could be heard with the ears. Exactly. But it was there. A faint rustle, like something scraping against the wood. A soft hiss, like the wind. And then, more distinct, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Footsteps on the gravel, coming from outside my front door. I stood stock still, my hand still on the doorknob. The footsteps stopped, but the pressure in the air, the sense of being watched, didn't go away. It was like the entire house held its breath, waiting. Then, the smell. It was faint at first, like burning wood. A sour, bitter scent, mixed with something else, something sweeter, like the smell of incense but spoiled. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go out there. I didn't want to face whatever had been following me. I locked the door and slid the bolt home, then retreated into the living room, feeling the shadows creep around the edges of my vision. It wasn't until much later that I finally worked up the nerve to check. The backyard was silent. The streetlights flickered in the distance, casting eerie shadows that seemed to stretch further than they should. Nothing was out of place. But as I stepped back inside, I felt it, right behind me. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. I had seen the shadow once. Now I couldn't escape it. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was following me. And it wasn't finished yet. The following morning I woke up with a gnawing dread that I couldn't shake. It was the kind of unease that lingers even after you open your eyes. The kind that settles into the pit of your stomach and makes your whole body feel like it's under threat. I went about my day mechanically, trying to act like everything was fine. I didn't tell anyone about the footsteps or the smell, not even Dylan. How could I? I barely understood it myself. The morning sun did little to lighten the oppressive weight I carried with me. The town seemed quieter than usual. The old trees along Holloway Road looked like they were watching me, their twisted branches reaching out as if trying to pull me back toward the place I had already tried to forget. I needed to do something. The more I thought about what had happened, the more I realized that sitting in my house waiting for something to happen was only making it worse. I had to understand what the hell was going on. I met Dylan at the diner again that afternoon. He was already there, sitting at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His face was pale, his eyes red. He hadn't slept much either. "You good?" I asked as I slid into the seat beside him. Dylan didn't immediately respond. His gaze was focused on something across the room, though I couldn't see what he was looking at. He just stared, his eyes glassy, like he wasn't really there. Finally, he turned to me. "You're not the only one feeling it, man. I went out to check the spot by the old church last night." His voice was strained, almost hoarse. I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean? You went back there?" He nodded, rubbing his eyes, as if trying to clear away a memory that clung to him. "I had to. I needed to see if it was real. But it's not just a shadow, Mason. It's something else. Something alive." I stared at him, my heart sinking. "What do you mean by alive?" Dylan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It's not a ghost, man. It's hunting us." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The idea of something stalking me, watching me, felt like the worst possible thing I could imagine. But then again, what else could it be? We hadn't just seen something weird the other night. That thing had looked at us, and the way it moved, it wasn't like any kind of apparition I had ever heard of. I was still processing this when the waitress came over, her expression tight, her eyes flicking, nervously toward the front door. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she knew something was off. As she walked away, Dylan followed her with his eyes for a moment, his gaze narrowing. "You're not the only one feeling it," he muttered. "I think it's been watching the whole town for a while now." "I mean, how long has it been there, Mason?" I couldn't answer him. I didn't know how to. But I could feel it too. Every corner of Blackridge felt colder. The trees along Holloway Road, the houses, even the people. Everything felt wrong. "I think we need to go back," Dylan said suddenly, his voice firm. "We need to go to the spot where we saw it. We need to figure out what the hell it wants." Hesitated. The thought of going back to the place where we had first seen it, where that shadow had looked at us with that eerie, deliberate awareness, filled me with dread. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we couldn't just ignore it. It wasn't going to go away. It was only a matter of time before whatever was following us made its move. That evening, after the sun dipped below the horizon, we found ourselves standing outside 47 Holloway. The air was still, and the only sounds were the distant rustling of the trees in the woods beyond. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows on the cracked asphalt. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, the sense of being watched. Dylan stood beside me, his jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the driveway, the spot where we had seen the shadow glide past us just days before. It was strange, but I thought I could smell it again, the faint, acrid scent of smoke, mixed with something else, something old. "I don't want to do this," I muttered under my breath, the weight of my fear making my legs feel like lead. Dylan didn't respond. He was already moving, stepping onto the edge of the driveway, his eyes locked on the spot where the shadow had stopped. He knelt down, running his hand over the ground like he was looking for something, anything that could explain what had happened. Suddenly he froze, his hand resting on the warm earth. "What the hell?" he whispered. I stepped forward, my heart thundering in my chest. "What is it?" Dylan's face was pale, his lips parted in disbelief. "It's still here. The ground. It's warm. Too warm. Like something's been standing here for days." My skin crawled. I felt it then. A pressure, almost tangible, pressing against me from all sides. The air was thick with something heavy, something that didn't belong. Then, as if on cue, the wind shifted. The rustling trees went quiet, and the night fell into a sudden oppressive stillness. And that's when I saw it. At the edge of the driveway, just beyond the streetlight's reach, a figure moved. Blacker than the night itself, stretching impossibly, long, its limbs undulating like smoke, gliding forward without a sound. It moved in the same way it had the other night, slow, deliberate, like it knew exactly where it was going. It didn't look at us this time. It didn't need to. It was already aware of us. And I knew, without a doubt, that it had been waiting for us to come back. And now we were going to find out what it wanted. The figure moved so slowly, so deliberately, that for a split second I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, the shadow was real. It was standing just beyond the light, a silhouette darker than the darkness around it, its limbs stretching like liquid smoke, flowing in unnatural ways that made me feel sick to my stomach. "Dylan." My voice was barely a whisper. My throat was dry, my heart hammering in my chest as I watched it glide closer. It was closer now, closer than I had ever hoped to be to something so unnatural. But Dylan was frozen. His eyes were locked on the shadow, unblinking. I could see his hand shaking where it rested on the warm earth, the tremors small but undeniable. I took a step back, feeling the creeping sensation of something watching us from the trees just beyond the light's edge. I could swear I heard a faint hum like an old hymn, but when I stopped to listen, it disappeared into the stillness. The air felt thicker here, almost suffocating, like the night was closing in on us. "Mason," Dylan said quietly, his voice hoarse. "What is that thing? It's not a ghost, right?" I couldn't answer him. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that whatever it wasn't normal. It wasn't like anything we had ever seen before. And as much as I hated to admit it, it was hunting us. But why? The shadow stopped, just a few feet away from us now. Its head angled in a way that suggested it was aware of us, studying us like prey. And then, as if sensing my hesitation, it glided forward once more, closing the distance between us. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back, heart racing. Dylan was still motionless, too mesmerized, too terrified to move. I tried to reach out to him to pull him away from it, but it was like something invisible held me in place. I could feel the presence of the shadow pressing against me, its weight heavy and suffocating. And then, just like that, it was gone. The darkness swallowed it whole. One moment it was there, a black streak in the corner of my vision, and the next, there was nothing. The light from the street lamp flickered twice and the world returned to its unnatural stillness. Where? I started, but Dylan's voice cut me off. It's gone, for now. His voice was trembling, his face pale, and his eyes darted around the driveway, still searching, still expecting it to appear again. I didn't feel the same. Something was wrong. The air felt different now, charged, heavy, like the whole night had shifted. My skin tingled, goosebumps rising on my arms. The sound of my own breathing felt too loud in the quiet that surrounded us. Why did it stop? I muttered, mostly to myself. Why didn't it come after us? Dylan turned slowly to face me. His face was grim, his eyes full of something I hadn't seen before, something deep, something terrified. I think it's not ready yet. The words hung in the air between us, sinking into my gut like a stone. I don't like this. I admitted, my voice low. I don't like any of this. Why did we come back here? Dylan didn't answer right away. He looked down at the ground, then back at the trees behind us. I don't know, man, but we can't ignore it anymore. We saw it. We felt it. Couldn't argue with him. I knew deep down that if we didn't face whatever it was now, it would only get worse. The shadow wouldn't just disappear. It had already chosen us. The feeling of being hunted wasn't something that could be wished away. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the chill of the night settling in. Then Dylan started walking, his head down, his steps slow and deliberate, like he was too tired to care about the danger. I followed him, not sure if I was going to be able to sleep tonight or if I even wanted to. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to get as far away from Holloway Road as possible, but I couldn't shake the feeling that doing so would be a mistake. As we walked back toward the street, the smell of burnt wood filled the air, again stronger this time. It was faint, just a whisper on the wind, but it was unmistakable. That same burnt odor, like the remnants of an old fire, mixed with something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was unsettling, wrong. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. When we reached the end of the driveway, I turned one last time to look back toward 47 Holloway. The place was dark now, silent, but I could feel it. The presence was still there, just out of reach, watching us, waiting for the right moment. The feeling of being hunted intensified, the chill settling deeper into my bones. Dylan was ahead of me now, already walking toward the street. I caught up to him quickly, but my feet felt heavier than before. The shadows behind us seemed to stretch, elongating, reaching toward us like claws. Mason. Dylan's voice broke through the growing sense of dread. You feel it too, right? I nodded, not trusting my voice. The weight of the air around us felt too much to bear. As we reached the street, the sound of footsteps echoed in the stillness behind us, but when I turned around to look, there was nothing. Just the empty road, the flickering streetlights, and the dense woods that pressed in on all sides. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the end. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. And I knew now, more than ever, that we couldn't outrun the thing following us. We couldn't escape it, because no matter where we went, it would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. The days that followed felt like a haze, like I was walking through a fog that I couldn't shake. Dylan and I tried to move on, pretending like we hadn't just seen something we couldn't explain. We went back to our routines, work, the diner, small talk, but every step I took, every corner I turned, I felt it. The weight of the shadow, the pressure in the air, always just behind me, watching. The smell of burning wood never fully left me, not even when I stepped into the comfort of my apartment. I could still taste it in the back of my throat, like ash. even though I hadn't smelled it again since that night. And the quiet hum of the old hymns that seemed to play in the background of the nightmare, followed me everywhere. It was like it was embedded in my mind, repeating in the silence between my thoughts. And every time I went to bed, I'd find myself looking at the clock, watching the minutes tick by, always afraid of the time that would come, when the shadow would find me again. It came. I was lying in bed one night, too tired to move but too awake to sleep. The room was dark save for the light of the street lamp outside that filtered through the blinds. I kept my eyes closed, willing myself to fall asleep, but I couldn't stop hearing that hum, low and distant, echoing in my mind like a broken record. Then the air shifted. It was subtle at first, just a cool breeze that I couldn't explain, but it was enough to make my body tense. My heart thudded in my chest and a familiar sickening sensation twisted in my gut. The shadow was near. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was imagining things. But that deep, instinctive dread was there, crawling up my spine, whispering in my ear. I opened my eyes. There in the darkness of the room was the faintest outline of something. Long, black like smoke, shifting unnaturally in the corner of the room. My pulse quickened. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I stared at it, frozen, knowing exactly what I was seeing. It wasn't just in my head. The gliding dark was here, right in my apartment, stretching across the floor like it had a mind of its own, and I was its next target. I heard the faintest whisper, a low, guttural sound like the rustling of pages in an old, decaying book. The words were indecipherable, but I knew they weren't meant for me. They were meant for someone else. Something else. I was paralyzed. The shadow stretched closer, and I felt it again, its presence pressing against me, cold and suffocating. It was reaching for me, getting closer with every passing second. It's here. It found me. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow stopped. The air stilled. I heard a soft thud behind me, like something had fallen. My body jerked, my eyes snapping to the corner of the room, but there was nothing there. Nothing, except the silence, and the smell of burnt wood, of fire and ash, and something deeper, something old. I turned back to the darkened corner, my mind racing. It couldn't just be a coincidence. This thing was here, inside my home, inside my mind, and it wasn't going to let me go. In that moment, I knew it was only a matter of time before it came for me, just as it had with Dylan. I had seen it once, watched it glide across the driveway, and now it was here. It wasn't just hunting, it was collecting. I tried to speak, tried to say something, anything, but no words came. My throat was tight, and my chest felt like it was being crushed under an invisible weight. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. It was as though the very air had been sucked out of the room. The shadow didn't move. It waited, like it always did, silent, watching. Then I heard the voice. It wasn't Dylan's. It wasn't mine. It wasn't even human. But it was there. In my head, a whisper that scraped against my skull, that clawed its way into my mind. You can't hide. The sound was so overwhelming, so forceful that I screamed, though I'm not sure if it was a scream or just my mind screaming on its own. I reached for the light, my hand trembling, desperate to dispel the dark, to make it go away. But when I flipped the switch, the light didn't come on. The room stayed dark, darker than it had ever been before. The shadow moved again, closer, this time, its shape more defined, more purposeful. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to run. I had to get away from it, away from this place. I stumbled out of bed, but my feet didn't move right. They didn't feel solid beneath me. The ground seemed to shift like I was walking on air, as if the world was warping around me. The shadow was following me. I could hear it, feel it, just behind me, always one step closer. I reached the door, and then I heard Dylan's voice, faint, like he was calling to me from far away. "Mason," he shouted, desperate. "Get out of there!" I didn't need to look back. I knew exactly what was behind me. The gliding dark was there, its shadow curling toward me like smoke. But this time, it wasn't just a shape, it was something more, a force. A presence that was hungry, that wanted something from me, something I couldn't give. The door was locked. I fumbled for the handle, panicking, the sound of my breath harsh in my ears. I could feel the darkness closing in. The smell of fire was unbearable now, suffocating. The hum of ancient hymns filled my ears loud and sharp. It wasn't just a sound, it was a warning. I finally broke through the door, gasping for air. But as I stepped outside into the cold night air, the feeling didn't go away. It was still there, still watching me from the shadows. And I knew that it wasn't over. That thing, the shadow, would follow me. It would never let go. The gliding dark had claimed me. I'd never thought much about the history of the Selangor Heights apartments when I moved in. It was just another building, part of a faceless cityscape, in a neighborhood that felt too quiet for my liking. But then, of course, everyone has their stories. And in this building, there were always rumors. It was easy to dismiss them, but the moment I arrived, the whispers about the 5th floor couldn't be ignored. Selangor Heights was built on land that had once been a squatter settlement. The old folks still talk about it, though most of them are reluctant to say much more. They say it was a peaceful place once, full of families, until the fire. A fire that to this day no one can fully explain. The blaze took 14 lives, including a young man named Rizal Adnan, who was last seen running back into the flames to save his sister. But his body was never recovered. No one really knew what had happened, only that the fire started in the middle of the night and spread too quickly for anyone to escape. The residents here told their stories in hushed voices, as if fearing the very words might invite the old ghost back. They say Rizal's spirit is still here, roaming the halls, and the most chilling part? They say the 5th floor, the one that has remained untouched since construction, is where it all started. It was meant to be a floor of luxury apartments, but when the fire happened, the building's structural integrity was compromised, and the developers abandoned it. Afterward, the floor was sealed off, and the elevator stopped working on that floor permanently. Of course, the strange thing about the 5th floor wasn't just its abandonment. The building's tenants would occasionally see a figure, especially during monsoon season. Someone drenched in rain, walking into the elevator and pressing the button to the 5th floor. They'd disappear once the doors opened, leaving no sign of their presence except a faint smell of burning wood in the air. I moved in during the dry season. Aina Rahman, 28 years old, graphic designer living alone. I was too focused on starting my life in this city to pay attention to the old stories. The apartments were nice, inexpensive enough for a young professional like myself. I thought I'd be just another anonymous resident in a concrete jungle. But everything changed one evening in September. It was around 6:45 p.m., and I had just gotten off work. The rainstorm had come out of nowhere, the kind of heavy downpour you don't see in the forecast but suddenly takes over everything. I took my usual route home through the streets of Klang, but by the time I reached the building, the streets were already flooded, the monsoon roaring like a wild animal. I made my way into the lobby of Selangor Heights, my wet shoes squelching on the tiled floor, the sound of the rain pounding against the windows like the sky was collapsing. I had to get to my apartment and dry off, but as I passed the vending machine in the corner of the lobby, I noticed a figure standing nearby, a man, soaked to the bone. His clothes were clinging to his frame, and his face was pale, almost ghostly under the harsh fluorescent lights. He was staring at the machine as though trying to decide on a snack, but it was clear he wasn't in a hurry. When he turned to me, I caught a glimpse of his eyes, and for a split second I felt a chill creep up my spine. Something about the way he was standing, so still, almost as if he were waiting. I didn't want to be rude, so I gave him a quick nod. He noticed, his pale lips curling into a strained smile. "Forgot my umbrella," he said, his voice soft but carrying an odd note of sincerity. His breath didn't fog in the cold air, and his words felt too deliberate, like he was reading, From a script, it caught me off guard. "Well, I've got one," I said without really thinking. I took the umbrella from my bag and handed it to him. "You're kind, thank you," he said. His eyes. There was something unsettling about them, something old. Too old. But I didn't question it. He stepped into the elevator with me, and the doors closed behind us. I pressed the button to my floor, the sound of the elevator's groan filling the silence between us. But the man didn't seem to notice. He stood there, eyes unfocused, watching the numbers above the doors light up as the elevator ascended. When the doors opened, they opened onto the 5th floor. I wasn't thinking clearly. The elevator had never stopped on that floor before, at least not for me. I'd lived here for months, and the elevator always bypassed the 5th floor, leaving it dark and silent. But there it was, the door opening as if the building had forgotten all its rules. The man stepped out. "Thank you," he murmured before turning and walking down the dimly lit hallway. The smell of food, of something warm and inviting, wafted toward me, mingling with the unmistakable scent of damp wood. The floor was strange, but the man seemed so comfortable there, as if he belonged. He disappeared around a corner, and the elevator doors closed silently behind me. I should have pressed the button to leave, but something held me there. My feet felt frozen. As the elevator descended, I stared at the empty hallway through the crack in the doors. The faint smell of cooking still lingered in the air, like a memory of a life that had never been. When I arrived at my floor, I tried to shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but the feeling stayed with me. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but for a moment the air had felt heavier on the 5th floor, almost like a memory trying to resurface. The next day I mentioned the encounter to Mr. Lim, the elderly building supervisor. His response was immediate, panicked almost. "The 5th floor? Impossible," he said. "That floor's been sealed off for years. No one lives there. We don't even have the lights connected up there." A small shiver ran down my spine. Tried to convince myself it had just been a strange coincidence. But when I later asked Mr. Lim about the man, he didn't even know who I was talking about. He paled. "There's no one on that floor. It's been empty since the fire." I tried to dismiss it, but as I stared at the elevator, I wondered what I had really seen, and why I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. The rain didn't let up. It poured in relentless sheets, soaking the streets and filling the air with the oppressive scent of wet concrete and rust. The entire city seemed to hold its breath. I tried to focus on work, but I couldn't shake the memory of that night. The man at the vending machine, the strange, drenched figure in the elevator, and of course the 5th floor. I had spent the whole morning trying to forget about it, rationalizing that I'd just been tired, stressed, and maybe a little jumpy from the storm. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. No one was supposed to be on that floor. The 5th floor had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. And yet there I was, standing in front of the elevator, wondering if I had somehow imagined the whole thing. Maybe I had been exhausted. Maybe the stress of moving combined with the storm had played tricks on my mind. It was hard to tell, but as the evening rolled around, the storm didn't ease. It only worsened. I had barely stepped into the lobby after a long day of work when I felt the tension in the air. There was something about this night that felt different. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the soft hum of the elevator seemed unnaturally loud against the backdrop of the storm's fury outside. I walked to the vending machine, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. My hands trembled slightly as I fumbled for some loose change. I noticed, without fully thinking, that the lights above flickered, casting an eerie glow across the lobby. The vending machine clicked and whirred as if it too were having difficulty adjusting to the storm outside. And then I saw him again. The drenched man. He appeared from the corner of my vision, his wet clothes sticking to his body like a second skin. His hair was plastered to his forehead, dripping with water that seemed to pool around his feet but never formed a puddle. He stood there silently, just as he had the night before, and looked at me with that same strange, too-perfect smile. I froze. I didn't want to acknowledge him at first. afraid that if I did, I'd somehow invite something I wasn't ready to understand. But he took a step closer, and I could feel the coldness radiating from him. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He didn't look like a man who had simply walked in from the storm. His clothes were too neat, his presence too unsettling. "Forgot my umbrella again," he said, his voice low but with that same disarming quality from before. I swallowed, forcing myself to respond, to say something normal. It's really coming down out there." He nodded slightly, his eyes not leaving mine. "I know," he said, his voice distant, as though he wasn't quite there. The coldness around him seemed to grow, pressing into me, seeping into the very air. There was something wrong. I couldn't place it, but every instinct in my body screamed that I needed to leave. But then, just as I turned to head for the elevator, he spoke again. "Thank you for your kindness," he said softly. I turned back. His smile had faded, replaced with an odd look in his eyes. A look of regret? Longing? I couldn't quite say. It unsettled me, but my feet felt frozen. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. "Are you—" I hesitated, feeling the words catch in my throat. "Are you sure you're all right? You look— I'm fine," he interrupted softly, his gaze slipping past me as if he were seeing something far beyond the walls of the building. He took a step toward the elevator, then stopped, turning back to look at me. "Thank you," he said again, his voice strangely emotional for someone who had only just met me. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, too uneasy to speak. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 5th floor. The elevator doors closed before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, feeling a coldness creep into my chest. I should have said something more, asked him what he was doing, why he was here. But I didn't. The elevator moved up, the sound of its humming filling the silence, and then it hit me. The 5th floor. My breath caught in my throat. I had told myself the night before that I'd imagined the whole thing, seen something that wasn't really there. But now, standing alone in the lobby, the reality of it hit me. He had gone to the 5th floor just like the night before. That wasn't supposed to happen. That floor had been sealed off. It was empty. I couldn't stop myself. My feet moved before my brain could process it. I walked toward the elevator, pressed the button for the 5th floor, and waited. It was a strange impulse, one that didn't quite make sense. But I was driven by something deeper, a sense of dread I couldn't shake. The elevator doors opened, with a quiet ding. The light inside flickered. It felt different this time, darker, as though the air was thicker, heavier. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The elevator hummed to life, the soft whirring sound surrounding me like a low whisper. I pressed the button for the 5th floor and the doors closed. As the elevator ascended, I couldn't help but feel a wave of cold wash over me. It wasn't the chill of the storm outside, nor was it the air conditioning in the building. This cold felt ancient, as though it had been there long before I ever arrived. The elevator stopped. The doors slid open. The 5th floor was as dark as I remembered it. The hallway was completely empty, the only sound the faint hum of the building's failing lights. The walls were bare, the floor dusty and cracked. I stepped out cautiously, my breath visible in the suddenly colder air. I felt my pulse quicken, my chest tightening as I moved forward into the emptiness. I looked to my left and right. There was no one there. But then, I heard it. The soft sound of footsteps, a faint creak of wood underfoot. Someone was running down the hallway. I froze. The footsteps echoed through the empty hallway, growing louder with each passing second. My heart skipped a beat and a chill ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just the old building creaking, the wind outside forcing strange noises through the cracks in the walls. But deep down, I knew better. This place was too quiet, too still, for those sounds to be anything but real. I swallowed hard and took a hesitant step forward, my shoes clicking softly against the dusty floor. The dim lights above flickered again. casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the cracked concrete. The air smelled stale, like something had been left untouched for years. I looked down the hallway, expecting to see something, or someone, approaching. But it was empty. There was nothing but the silent, decaying walls of the abandoned floor. The footsteps continued. They were growing closer now, but no one was in sight. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to run, back to the elevator and pretend none of this had happened. But I couldn't. I felt a strange pull, as if something or someone was waiting for me. A soft rustling sound came from the end of the hallway, just out of view. I stepped closer, holding my breath. My pulse quickened as I approached the source of the noise. It was faint at first, like a whisper, but then it grew louder, more distinct. It was almost like a voice, but the words were unintelligible, muffled by the walls and the pounding of the rain outside. The sound seemed to come from behind the door at the end of the hall. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I knew that door. I had seen it earlier when I walked the hallway. An old, weathered door that seemed to stand out from the rest, its paint peeling and chipped. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I couldn't help myself. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, and I found myself standing in front of the door. My hand reached for the cold metal handle, and for a brief moment, I hesitated. What was I doing? Why was I here? But then the door creaked open, almost as if it were inviting me in. Inside, it was dark. The only light came from the flickering overhead bulb, casting eerie shadows across the room. I stepped inside, my feet crunching on the dry, rotting wood of the floor beneath me. The room was small, but it felt larger in the silence, the walls seeming to stretch out infinitely in the darkness. And then, I saw it. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, was the faint outline of a figure. I couldn't make out any details at first, just the shape of a person hunched over, their back to me. The air in the room grew colder, heavier, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. The footsteps had stopped, but the air felt charged, as though something was about to happen. I took a cautious step forward, my eyes still fixed on the figure in the corner. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and my hands began to tremble. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the oppressive quiet. "Is someone there?" There was no response. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. It was as if it hadn't even heard me. I took another step, my shoes making a dull thud on the wooden floor. The figure still didn't respond. But then, as I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There on the floor beneath the figure was a puddle of water, a small, dark pool that shimmered in the dim light. It was as if the figure had been standing there long enough to leave a trace of its presence, a wet spot on the floor that seemed to spread outward like an ink blot. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. And then, as I stood frozen in place, the figure moved. At first, it was just a slight shift, a subtle adjustment of posture, but then slowly, the figure turned, its head swiveling to face me. I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw wasn't human. The face was pale, almost ghostly, with hollow eyes that seemed to sink deep into its skull. Its skin was slick, with water, the same unnatural coldness I had felt when I touched the drenched man's hand. It wasn't just wet. It was as though the figure was part of the storm itself, the rain having seeped into its very being, giving it a sickly, translucent quality. The figure's mouth opened, but no sound came out. There was only a soft, inhuman rasp, a low, almost imperceptible whisper that vibrated in the pit of my stomach. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a figure in the corner of the room. It was a part of the storm, a part of the tragedy that had occurred here all those years ago, and it had been waiting for me. I stumbled backward, my pulse racing, my mind desperately trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But the more I tried to understand, the more I realized that I couldn't. None of this made sense. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the small, suffocating room. The air grew even colder, and the whispering sound grew louder, the words now distinguishable, though they made no sense. Save her. Before I could react, the figure moved again, this time toward me. The unnatural, fluid motion reminded me of the drenched man in the elevator, gliding with no regard for the rules of the world. It was too fast, too wrong. I reached for the door handle, but it was locked. I screamed, banging on the door, begging for it to open, for someone to help me. But there was no answer, no help. Just the cold, wet air pressing in on me, the whispering voice growing louder and more insistent. Save her. Save her. And then, as the darkness closed in around me, I realized with sickening clarity that the figure wasn't just here for me. It was here for someone else. Someone I hadn't even known was still trapped in this building. I looked around the room, panic rising in my chest, but I couldn't see anything. Only the figure, now moving closer, its eyes locked on me with that same dead, soulless gaze. And then everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Minutes? Hours. The world had fallen into a suffocating blackness, a void that seemed to stretch on forever. The kind of blackness that holds you in place, freezes you in time, and swallows you whole. When I finally regained consciousness, the world around me felt alien, foreign. The first thing I noticed was the overwhelming silence. It wasn't the usual quiet that comes with nightfall, or the dull hum of the building's outdated ventilation system. No, this was something different. It was a stillness that pressed against my ears, a kind of silence that held the weight of 100 years of regret, a century of secrets, and the aching pulse of something ancient. I was lying on the cold, dusty floor of the empty room. My clothes were damp, clung to my skin like they had been soaked in a rainstorm. But there was no storm. The wind outside had died down. The rain had stopped. It was eerily calm now, as though the storm had never existed, or worse, that it had passed and taken something from me that I couldn't yet grasp. I pushed myself up from the floor, my head pounding with a sharp, dizzying pain. As my eyes focused, I became aware of my surroundings. The room was unchanged, exactly as I had seen it before, dark and barren. The pale light above flickered like a dying candle, casting fleeting shadows against the cracked walls. There was no one here, no figure, no sounds, just the oppressive silence and the lingering sense of wrongness that crawled under my skin. I shook my head, trying to clear the haze that clouded my thoughts. What had happened? The last thing I remembered was that thing, the figure, the pale face, the water-soaked skin, and the whispering voice. The voice that kept repeating that same message. Save her. Who was it talking about? Who did I need to save? I stood up shakily, my legs unsteady beneath me. I glanced at the door, the locked door. It was no longer locked. The handle turned easily, beneath my fingers, and I pushed it open with a hesitant nudge. Beyond the threshold lay the hallway, the same empty, decaying hallway I had seen before. But something was different now. The air felt heavier. It felt suffused with an energy that was both stagnant and oppressive. I took a cautious step out into the hallway, the faint sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. I glanced to the left, to the right. Nothing. But something was off. It wasn't just the empty hallway. It was the feeling that something had shifted in the building. It was like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I could feel it, deep in my gut. Save her. The whisper had returned. I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. But no one was there. My mind raced, but no answers came. Instead, an unsettling sense of inevitability settled into my chest. I wasn't going to find any answers here. Not now. Not in this place. I needed to leave. I turned quickly and headed for the elevator, my feet moving faster now as though my body knew something my mind couldn't yet comprehend. The elevator was a mere few feet away, but it felt like it took forever to reach it. Every step was heavy, each one weighed down by the lingering dread that pulled at my heels. I reached the elevator, my hand trembling as I pressed the button. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. The stale, metallic air of the elevator was a sharp contrast to the musty humidity of the hallway. The doors slid shut behind me, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe. Safe. I was safe. Or so I thought. But as I glanced at the flickering lights above, I froze. In the reflection of the elevator doors, I saw something, or someone, behind me. It wasn't a person. It was the figure, the same drenched figure standing perfectly still facing me. My heart thudded in my chest. The figure's eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, locked onto mine in the reflection. It was as if it was watching me, waiting for something. Its face, pale and wet with water, was just inches away from me, though in reality, it was still at the far end of the hallway. But it was so close. Too close. I turned around, but the hallway was empty again. No figure, just the empty, decaying walls of the building. I wasn't sure whether I had imagined it, or if it had been something else. But something told me that whatever it was, it had been real. I glanced at the floor indicator as the elevator began its slow descent. The 5th floor was just above me. I wondered if the figure was still there, standing in the hallway, waiting. Or was it waiting for me, specifically? The elevator stopped abruptly. The lights flickered. I gripped the rail beside me, holding my breath. The doors opened, and there, standing at the far end of the dimly lit lobby, was the drenched figure again. I could feel my heart stop in my chest. My body froze, too paralyzed to react. And then, with a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, I heard it again. Save her. And in that instant, everything clicked. The figure, the whispers, the rain, the 5th floor. It wasn't about me at all. It wasn't about saving myself. It was about saving the one person who had been left behind. The one who had never gotten the chance to escape. The person who was still here, trapped in the ruins of this place. The person I needed to save. I took a step toward the figure. It didn't move. It was waiting for me. Waiting for me to do what it had asked. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I was left standing in the silence. There was no turning back now. The figure had shown me the path. I just had to follow it. And maybe, just maybe, I would finally understand what happened here. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. And the storm was far from over. The figure didn't speak again, but its presence weighed heavily in the air, like a thick fog that I couldn't shake. It was as though the hallway itself had become part of its being, stretching and bending under the oppressive force it exuded. I had no choice now but to move forward. My mind was reeling, heart pounding in my chest, but my body moved instinctively, pulled toward something I couldn't yet understand. The closer I got to the end of the hallway, the heavier the air became. The floor creaked underfoot, an old, familiar sound that only seemed to intensify in the silence. I didn't dare look back to see if the elevator doors had opened again. I couldn't afford to. The figure was waiting for me, its face pale, its body soaked, its limbs stiff in a way that felt unnatural. I approached the final door. It was slightly ajar, but I couldn't see through the gap. I had the unsettling feeling that someone, or something, was behind it, waiting for me to make the first move. The closer I got, the more I could feel it in my chest, the oppressive weight of dread. I had to know what was on the other side. If I was going to understand the whispers, the figure, the endless cycles of what felt like torment, this was the only way forward. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the faintest sound, but in the silence of the building, it felt like a scream. Inside, the room looked nothing like the others I had walked through. It wasn't the hollow, decaying shell of an abandoned floor. This one was different. It was still standing as if it hadn't decayed at all. The air was warm. The smell of cooking wafted through the space, and I could hear the soft murmur of voices. There was a table in the center of the room, set for two, with old-fashioned dishes and silverware glinting in the dim light of an overhead lamp. It felt so real, too real. like a memory, one that didn't belong to me but somehow felt familiar. I could almost hear the laughter of a child, the faintest echoes of something long buried. I stepped in, the floor creaking beneath my weight. The room seemed to stretch out before me like a dream of what was once here, what was lost, what never had a chance to escape. That's when I saw it. At the end of the table, a picture frame. I couldn't make out the faces at first, but as I stepped closer, my blood ran cold. It was an old photo, faded with time, but there they were, two people. A young man and a girl, probably in their late teens. The man's face was hauntingly familiar. I leaned in closer, my hands trembling as I picked up the frame. It was Rizal Adnan, the man who had died in the fire. But the girl in the photo was his sister, the one he had run back to save. And then it hit me. The whispers, the drenched figure, the distorted space of the 5th floor. It wasn't just a haunting. This was a loop, a cycle that had been repeating for decades. Rizal wasn't just trying to save his sister that night. He had failed to. He had died, and she was left behind in this world. The fire that consumed them both had never really ended. It had left something behind, something that couldn't move on. I could feel the weight of it then, pressing down on me. The memory of the fire, the screams of pain, the sorrow of unfinished business. Rizal's ghost wasn't haunting the building to torment. It was searching for something, searching for his sister, but also for redemption. The thing I had seen in the hall, the figure I thought was a threat, it wasn't. It had been trying to guide me, trying to show me the way to finally break the cycle. My fingers curled around the picture frame and I turned it over, expecting to see the back, the names, the dates. But there was nothing, just a faint marking, like a signature. It was barely visible, but as I stared, I realized the words were in a language I didn't recognize. It was almost like a prayer, something ancient, something that had been lost in time. I turned around then, and the figure was there again, standing by the door, its head tilted slightly, as if waiting for me to make my decision. I swallowed hard. I didn't know what to do next. But the figure moved then, slowly, deliberately, as though it had made its choice. It reached a hand toward me, its fingers pale, cold, and stiff, and placed it on my shoulder. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but the shock of cold that ran through me was enough to paralyze me. The moment I froze, I heard it again, that whisper. Save her. I closed my eyes, and in that instant, everything became clear. I wasn't meant to just witness this. I wasn't meant to be a passive observer. Rizal had saved me once already, guiding me out of harm's way when I would have walked into a deadly disaster. But now, it was time for me to save him. To save his sister. To end the loop once and for all. The moment I realized this, the building seemed to shift again. The room around me flickered, like it was a fading image from an old movie reel. The lights dimmed even more, the air growing colder, and for a second, I thought I heard the faintest sound of someone running in the hallway. I stepped forward toward the door. But as I did, the world around me started to distort, shifting like smoke. The walls cracked, the floor groaned. The sounds of the fire, the screams, the agony of souls trapped in the past, everything rushed back, and then silence. I opened my eyes to find myself standing outside. The building was gone. The streets were empty, but the rain had stopped. The monsoon had passed, leaving only a sense of finality in its wake. It was as though the entire building, the curse, the shadows, it had all disappeared. The figure, Rizal's ghost, was gone too. The cycle had broken. I didn't look back. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the last few hours. No, the last few decades lift from my shoulders. As I walked away, the rain-soaked streets of the city stretched out before me. I didn't know what had happened to the 5th floor or to the ghosts that had haunted it, but I knew this. I was free, and so was Rizal. I could hear it in the distance, the faint echo of a child's laughter, a sound of peace at last. And I knew, at that, moment that I had done the right thing.